Hello everyone, I'm the Creep's Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Probably my entire life would count as a disturbing story if I really laid it out from beginning to end. Not the kind of disturbing with blood or monsters, or any of that made-up stuff. The real kind, the slow, quiet kind. The kind that creeps in under the skin, tightens your chest, and keeps you up at night for no clear reason. The kind that no one ever believes until it's too late. I used to think I was just unlucky, or maybe cursed somehow. It took me a long time to understand that what happened to me wasn't bad luck. It was control, plain and simple. I was raised in a house where the outside world wasn't just dangerous, it was forbidden. My mother and grandmother lived together, and I lived under their eyes. Always. I was the only child, and according to them, I needed to be protected. From what they never exactly said, just out there, said like a curse, like the whole world was full of fire and monsters and sharp edges that I'd never survive. From the time I could walk, I was told no. No visiting friends. No going to birthday parties. No walking down the block. No sleepovers. No trick-or-treating. No answering the door. No cooking. No going outside unless they were beside me. No phones unless they were checked first. No secrets. No growing. By the time I was 10, I knew better than to ask why. Every time I pushed, it would turn into hours of being stared at with disappointment, being prayed over, or being reminded that only they knew what was best for me. By the time I was 15, I wasn't asking anything anymore. I just sat in my room, silent, while other kids I saw through the blinds walked to school or hung out on the corner. I never did those things. I did homeschool work from old church worksheets and read books that my grandmother said were clean enough. I had no social media, no friends, no life beyond those walls. I remember thinking that maybe once I turned 18, things would get better. I thought they'd have to let go then, but that was a joke. When I turned 19, I asked quietly, hesitantly, if I could get a job. Just something small. I said I could walk there. Said I could even give them my check. I just wanted to try. My mother's face twisted in a way I'll never forget. Like I'd insulted her. Like I'd betrayed her. You don't need a job, she told me, and that was that. Everything you need is right here with me. She said it like a blessing, like I should be thankful. But it wasn't a gift. It was a prison. That's when I started realizing I had to leave. Not just someday, soon. I wasn't a kid anymore. I was legally an adult, even if they didn't treat me like one. So I started watching, listening, waiting. I began to gather money in secret. I'd find loose change in the laundry, pull forgotten dollar bills from coat pockets. I even started taking coins from the bottom of her purse when she wasn't looking. It wasn't much, and I felt sick with guilt, but I knew if she caught me, it would all be over. I didn't have a phone of my own anymore. The one I used to have, she took it and had it reported stolen when I tried to make a call once without her knowing. She said I couldn't be trusted with it. So I hid the money in the lining of an old jacket in the back of the closet. I told myself every day that I'd find a way out. One day I packed a bag. I didn't have much, a few clothes, a water bottle, and the cash I'd managed to save over a few months. I waited until they were asleep. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely pull on my shoes. I got to the door, opened it slowly, and made it halfway across the yard before I heard her scream my name. She tackled me before I could even reach the sidewalk. I remember the feeling of the gravel scraping my arm, the heat of her hands dragging me backward by my backpack straps. Then my grandmother appeared, grabbing my legs. I fought, but I wasn't strong enough. They pulled me back inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. That night, she slept on the floor beside my bed, her arm resting on my ankle. The next day, the locks on the windows were screwed shut. The bathroom door lost its lock. My clothes were sorted through. The bag disappeared. And my mother sat me down and said I was going to church. She took me to a holiness meeting. Not a regular church service, not a sermon. Something darker. Something cruel. The whole thing was loud and frantic. People shouting, speaking in tongues, sweat pouring down their faces. My mother whispered to the pastor that I was troubled, rebellious, and he nodded like he knew what that meant. They pushed me to the front and started praying over me, chanting, touching my head, gripping my shoulders, for 3 straight hours. They tried to cast out the demons they said were making me disobedient. My ears rang for days after. When we got home, I went numb. It was like I wasn't even in my body anymore. I didn't try to leave again for a while. I couldn't even think straight. I didn't know what to trust. My own thoughts felt dangerous. Weeks passed, maybe months. The days bled together in that house. Every time I got near the front door, my mother would appear like she had a sixth sense. I tried again once. I managed to buy a bus ticket online using the computer late one night and cleared the browser history. I had enough for a ride out of town. I planned it all. But on the day I was supposed to leave, my cousin showed up. She smiled at me, said she understood, said she wanted to help. I believed her. I got into her car. She said she just wanted to talk first, so we parked near the grocery store. When I tried to open the door again after our talk, it wouldn't open. Child lock. She drove me home. I didn't fight her. I couldn't. My limbs felt like they weren't even mine anymore. Back at the house, my mother and grandmother were waiting. My cousin hugged them both like she was proud. After that, everything changed. I wasn't allowed outside at all, not even to take the trash out. They took my shoes. They took the doorknobs off the inside doors. My bedroom window got nailed shut completely. My grandmother started keeping a baby monitor on my nightstand, always on. I wasn't even allowed to go to the bathroom without someone standing outside the door. They said it was for my safety, said I needed time to heal. That year is a blur. I don't know how many days passed. I don't know what I did most of the time. I just remember lying on my bed and staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was it. If I would ever be let go. If I would be 25, 30, 40, and still living in that house, being watched, controlled, and prayed over like a problem that never went away. But something changed after that year. A woman who used to go to the church stopped by one day. She was dropping off food and supplies. She was kind. She used to smile at me before everything got worse. That day, when she saw me, she looked surprised. Said I'd gotten so quiet. Said I used to be brighter. She looked worried. I didn't say much, but I think she saw something in my face. She came back a few days later when my mother and grandmother were out in the backyard hanging laundry. She handed me something quickly and whispered, "Hide this." It was a small flip phone, prepaid, one of those kinds people use when they don't want to be tracked. I almost cried. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. That phone became my lifeline. I waited 2 weeks before using it. I had to make sure no one had seen. I kept it under the floorboard behind my bed, the same spot where I'd once hidden coins. Late at night, I finally used it. I found the number for a local shelter and texted them. Not called, texted. They had a hotline. I explained everything. Slowly, carefully. I sent messages in pieces over several nights. They believed me. They helped me plan. Not just running, but getting out legally. Quietly. I didn't just want to escape. I wanted to end it. For good. One night, while my grandmother slept and my mother dozed in front of the TV, I walked out the back door, got into a volunteer's car, and didn't look back. The next months were hard. So hard. I had nothing. No ID, no money, no clothes except what I'd worn. I was legally an adult, but I had no proof of anything. I had to start from scratch. Birth certificate, social, doctor's visits, therapy, everything. But I did it. Slowly. Piece by piece. I got a job at a corner store. I rented a room in a shared house. I bought my own secondhand phone. I got a state ID. I bought my first pair of shoes that no one else picked for me. Sometimes I still flinch when I hear the word home. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm still trapped in that room, with her arm resting on my leg, so I couldn't run. But then I hear traffic outside, the buzz of neighbors, the sound of life. And I remember I'm free. I don't tell many people my story. Most of them wouldn't understand. They think bad childhoods mean yelling or hitting or a broken family. They don't know what it's like to be wrapped in cotton and told it's love while your world gets smaller and smaller until you can't breathe anymore. They don't know what it's like to finally walk away from that and build a life from nothing. But I do. I know. I'm still scared sometimes. I still have dreams where I'm trapped, where I can't leave. But then I wake up and I make my own breakfast. I lock my own door. I walk down the street just because I can. And every single time I do, I know I survived something that should have broken me. But it didn't. I made it out. And I'm never going back. It was sometime past midnight. maybe closer to 1:30 in the morning. I'd been sitting at my computer for hours, headphones on, half a dozen tabs open, bouncing between work and distractions. The house was completely silent except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan above me and the low clicking of my keyboard. I was staying with family, same house we visit every year, same creaky floors, same familiar layout. My aunt and uncle were asleep in their room down the hall, and my younger cousins had gone to bed hours ago. I was the only one awake, as usual. I had that tight, pulsing pressure in my lower stomach that I'd been ignoring for too long. I needed to pee badly, but I kept delaying it. Just finish this task. Just read one more paragraph. But after a few more minutes of sitting there shifting in my seat, it was too uncomfortable to ignore anymore. I sighed, saved my work, pulled my headphones off, and got up from the desk. My room was small, just a guest room really, with an old bed, a computer table, and a window that looked out into the neighbor's overgrown backyard. Everything was dark, except for the soft glow from my screen and a bit of moonlight slipping in around the curtain. I reached for the doorknob slowly, easing the door open without letting it creak too loud. When you're staying in someone else's house, you move different at night. You feel like any small sound is magnified, like the floor itself is listening. I stepped out barefoot, careful to press my heels down first, and then roll to the ball of my foot, like I was sneaking past someone asleep in the hallway. I didn't bother turning on the light, didn't want to wake anyone, and I didn't need it. I knew the layout of this house better than I know my own. I've been coming here every summer since I was a kid, sometimes for weeks at a time. That bathroom run was second nature by now. Out the door, 3 steps forward, turn left. Another short walk, maybe 6 steps, then left again. That put me into the hallway proper, the stretch that led down to the bathroom. The hallway was long and narrow with 3 doors, one on the left, one on the right, and the bathroom at the very end. No windows, no lights on, completely dark. But even blind, I could picture it in my mind like a floor plan laid out in muscle memory. I shuffled along quietly until I reached the bathroom door. My hand slid over the surface until I found the knob and twisted it open. I flicked the light switch and squinted against the sudden brightness. The white tiles, the beige rug, the little cracked soap dish on the edge of the sink, it all looked exactly the same as I remembered. I closed the door behind me, relieved myself, washed up, and turned the light off. As soon as the light snapped off, the darkness came down like a heavy blanket. It felt thicker than before, like the sudden contrast made it harder to adjust. I blinked a few times, trying to get my bearings again. I waited until I could see the faint outline of the doorway, then stepped back into the hallway, gently pulling the door shut behind me. I turned left, heading back the way I came. Or at least, I thought I did. I took a few careful steps forward, then turned right. That should have put me on the short hallway that leads to my bedroom door, just a few more feet ahead. But this time, something felt off. It was subtle at first. The air felt colder. Maybe it was the AC kicking on, but I couldn't hear it. The hallway suddenly felt longer. My steps weren't bringing me to the door. I reached out to touch the wall like I always do when I walk in the dark. I usually brush my fingertips against it just to make sure I'm centered, but this time I couldn't feel anything. I stopped moving, stood still, total silence. I reached out wider with my arms, slowly sweeping the air in front of me like a blind person searching for a wall. Nothing, just empty space and darkness. I was confused, disoriented. I had only taken 2 turns. That was the way back. That had to be the way back. I took another step forward, then another. That's when I saw it. Just a flicker at first. A quick, almost imperceptible shift in the shadows ahead of me. Like something moving across my field of vision. My heart jumped. I froze completely, breath held in my throat. I leaned slightly to the left, then the right, trying to see if it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. But there it was again. A faint movement, low and slow, right where I thought my door should be. It wasn't a sound, not yet. Just the visual of something not quite right. Something wrong with the dark. I stood there like that for what felt like a full minute. Listening, watching. Every part of me tensed like a wire pulled tight. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, the faint tremble of adrenaline starting to work its way into my limbs. I swallowed hard and told myself to just move. Just keep walking. It was probably nothing. A trick of the dark. A coat rack catching the light from the window. My mind grasped for anything simple, logical. I stepped forward again, slowly, hands slightly raised in front of me. That's when I saw it move again. Only this time it was closer. And not just closer. Bigger. Like it had been waiting, just a shape in the dark, and now it was responding to me. I still couldn't make out anything specific. No face, no clear body, but I swear it leaned forward, just a little. Like it noticed me too. That did it. Panic began to rise in my chest like a swell of icy water. I stopped breathing. Everything in me screamed to turn around, go back to the bathroom and flip the light on, flood the hall with brightness. But I didn't want to run. I didn't want to panic like a child over what was probably nothing. So I stepped again. My hand brushed something hard, wooden, and I realized I was near my door. My fingers found the edge of it, then the knob. As soon as I touched the handle, the shadow surged forward. Not running, not lunging, but it moved. Closer, right into my space. I recoiled, heart hammering. I couldn't make it out clearly. It wasn't like a person exactly, more like a bulk, a shape, something tall but undefined, but real enough to trigger every instinct I had. My body locked up. I stood there, trembling, not sure what to do. My skin was cold, and I realized I was sweating. It was right in front of me now, close enough that I could feel it, almost like a pressure in the air, or heat without warmth. I couldn't explain it. I was shaking, nearly dizzy from the adrenaline. I raised my hands and reached toward it, hoping maybe it was just a trick of angles. Maybe the hallway was narrower than I remembered. My fingers moved forward slowly, so slow it felt like I was underwater. Then my nose hit something solid. Not soft, not warm, not anything remotely human. Glass. I jerked back instinctively, confused, still blind. I reached out again, slower this time, palms flat. I slid them along the surface. Cold, smooth, a frame around it. My heart was still racing, but reality began to catch up. I took another step back and looked around again, letting my eyes adjust. There, just the faintest glimmer of reflection. A mirror. The mirror that hangs on the hallway wall, just a few feet from my door. I hadn't made the second right turn. I had been walking straight into the side wall of the hallway. What I thought was a shadow moving toward me had been my own reflection. My legs almost gave out from under me. I exhaled hard, a broken kind of laugh catching in my throat. I turned sharply, and there was my door, right where it should have been. I'd been standing perpendicular to it the whole time, disoriented in the dark. The mirror had shown my own shape moving closer as I got nearer. My own movement, just slightly delayed by poor depth perception in darkness, had triggered all of that fear. I'd been reacting to myself. I turned the handle, stepped inside, and quietly closed the door. Then I leaned my back against it for a moment and just let the silence settle again. It was so stupid and simple. But in the moment, it had felt completely real. Like I was seconds away from being grabbed, or worse. That primal kind of terror that doesn't wait for logic. Eventually, I made my way back to the desk and sat down. The monitor had gone to sleep, casting everything into dimness. I didn't turn the lights on. I just sat there in the dark for a while, staring ahead, listening to the quiet house, heart slowly calming down. I didn't tell anyone the next morning. No point. It'd sound ridiculous. Just me scaring myself over nothing. But it stayed with me for a long time. The way the air felt colder. The way I felt sure, absolutely certain, that something was about to touch me. That kind of fear isn't just imagination. It lives somewhere deep in your brain, buried under all the rational thoughts. And once it wakes up, even for a second, you never forget how it felt. All that from a mirror. A stupid mirror on a wall I've walked past 1,000 times. I was maybe 10 or 11 years old at the time. We lived in this apartment building just off the main road in a quieter part of the city. It was one of those dull gray 4-story buildings with thin walls and windows that always let in more noise than light. We didn't have a lot of money, but it wasn't the worst place we ever lived. The stairs creaked, the radiators knocked loudly when they heated up, and the paint was chipping around every doorframe. But it was home. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor, directly above this woman my mom had started to befriend. Her name was Lillian. I didn't know her last name. She lived alone in the 2nd floor unit right beneath us. At first, I just saw her in passing, like in the hallway or on the front steps. She was quiet, not cold or rude, just quiet. She'd nod at me sometimes, or say a soft hello. I don't think she had a job. I never saw her leave in the morning like other tenants, and there were no work clothes hanging to dry, no lunch boxes, no no sign of daily routine. My mom started talking to her more after a few weeks of living there. She had this way of being nice to everyone, especially people who looked like they needed someone to talk to. I remember the first time she invited Lillian up for tea. I was sitting on the floor watching some old cartoons, and I barely noticed when she came in. She had this heavy coat on even though it was spring and not that cold. Her hair was long and jet black, thick and always kind of messy, like she didn't brush it much. She barely made eye contact, but she smiled politely and sat on the edge of the couch while my mom talked and poured tea into two old chipped mugs. That became a regular thing. Once or twice a week, Lillian would come up for tea or coffee, sometimes for hours. She never talked much. I'd listen from my room sometimes, and it was mostly my mom doing the talking while Lillian nodded or gave short, quiet replies. Mom would ask her how her day was, talk about random things like recipes or weather or how she hated the noisy upstairs neighbor. Lillian just listened. She'd sometimes laugh a little, this soft, sad laugh that didn't match her face. I didn't pay much attention. Adults bored me then, and I didn't understand much about people or loneliness or pain. I just thought she was weird. Then one day, she stopped coming. A week passed, then two. No knocking, no footsteps from downstairs, no running water or faint TV sounds through the floor. At first, Mom said maybe she was visiting family or had errands to run. Then she said maybe Lillian just needed space. But by the end of the third week, I noticed the tension building in her voice whenever I asked if she'd heard from her. It wasn't like Lillian to just disappear. She didn't have friends. She didn't go anywhere. She was always around until she wasn't. One afternoon, my mom looked at me and said, "Let's go check on her." We walked downstairs slowly. I remember every step. The hallway smelled like old carpet and dust. The light bulbs overhead flickered like they always did. I followed her down the narrow corridor until we stood in front of Lillian's door. My mom knocked gently once, then twice. No answer. She looked at me, then knocked again, a little harder. That's when the door creaked open on its own. I can still hear that sound, slow and hollow, like the door had been slightly open for days and just needed a nudge. It wasn't locked. The apartment was dark inside. The blinds were drawn, and a heavy smell rolled out the moment the door opened. It hit my face like a wall. It was thick and sharp, like rotting meat and rust, and something else I couldn't describe at the time, but now recognize as decay. My mom paused in the doorway. She called out softly, but there was no answer. Then, after a second's hesitation, she pushed the door open all the way and stepped inside. I followed her. We moved slowly. The place was freezing. The curtains were drawn tight, and the only light came from the narrow slice behind the living room blinds. The carpet was dirty and littered with little things, hair ties, bits of paper, old dishes on the floor. The couch cushions were askew like someone had tossed them around. A cup had fallen and shattered near the coffee table. I remember stepping over it carefully, scared of the glass. The smell got worse as we moved deeper in. My mom stopped in the hallway and turned toward the bathroom. I stood behind her, holding my breath, not knowing what we were about to see. The door to the bathroom was halfway open. The light inside was on, buzzing faintly like it hadn't been touched in weeks. That's when I saw her. She was in the bathtub. The water was dark, almost black, and barely covered her. Her skin was pale gray, tinged with purple, and her wrists were slashed. Dried blood had crusted down her arms and into the tub, staining the rim and the floor. Her head leaned back over the edge, mouth open slightly. Her eyes weren't looking at anything. Her hair was floating on the surface like weeds. I don't remember screaming. I don't think I did. I just stared. The smell made my stomach twist. I stepped back, then turned and walked out of the hallway, down the living room, out the door. I waited outside, breathing heavily, trying not to throw up. My mom came out a minute later and told me to stay there. She ran upstairs to call the police. I sat on the steps in front of the building. It was bright outside. Birds were chirping. A car drove by playing music too loud. It didn't make sense. None of it matched what we had just seen. I kept my eyes on the road, trying not to think about her face or the water in the tub. The police arrived within 10 minutes. They went in, asked questions, took photos, put up tape. I watched all of it from the same spot on the steps. A few neighbors came out to see what was going on. I heard whispers. Someone mentioned a girlfriend who had left a few months earlier. Someone else said they heard crying late at night for weeks before the silence. Eventually, one of the officers came and talked to my mom, and then she came and sat beside me. She looked tired and shaken. I asked her what happened. She didn't explain much. She just rubbed my shoulder and said something I'll never forget. "Don't worry, Mark. She was our friend, so she won't haunt us." I don't know why she said that. Maybe it was just something to ease my mind. Maybe she didn't know what else to say. But it didn't make me feel better. It made it worse. I kept thinking about what she looked like in the tub, about how long she had been there without anyone noticing. I kept imagining how quiet it must have been in that apartment, the water going cold, the blood drying slowly. The thought of her being down there the whole time while I watched cartoons upstairs made my skin crawl. After the funeral, which we didn't attend, things went mostly back to normal. The landlord cleaned out the unit, painted over the bathroom tiles, and rented it to someone new within a month. The new tenant never knew what had happened. I passed them on the stairs once and wondered if they ever felt strange in that apartment, if the air still smelled faintly of something rotted underneath the fresh paint and new carpet. I didn't sleep well for a long time after that. Every creak in the floor or sound from the pipes made me tense up. I kept imagining her standing in our hallway, soaked in bath water and blood, looking up at us through the ceiling she died beneath. I knew it wasn't real. I knew ghosts weren't real. But something about the silence that followed her death stayed with me. As I got older, I learned more about things like depression and grief. I understood more about what it meant to be truly alone. I thought about how my mom tried to be there for her, how she listened and made tea and offered company. But it wasn't enough. Sometimes it just isn't. That was the first time I saw death up close. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, still, the kind of thing you don't talk about at school or see in movies. Just an empty apartment, a cold tub, and the smell of something that had been left too long. Years later, I moved away from that building. I don't think about it often, but every now and then, when I pass an apartment door with the number 203 on it, or catch the smell of rust and old water, it all comes back. Lillian didn't haunt me in the way my mom meant, but she never really left either. It was supposed to be a quiet trip, just a week away to recharge. My wife and I had been going through a busy few months, work stress, family obligations, barely enough time to sit and eat dinner together. We booked the small rental cottage in Bath, UK, for early spring. The photos online showed a charming stone structure nestled at the edge of a quiet residential road. A little white gate led into a small gravel courtyard. A low stone wall wrapped around it with some hedges, and the front door sat tucked under a modest wooden awning. The place had character, quaint, peaceful, private. We arrived in the early afternoon. The air was still a bit chilly, but you could feel the season shifting. Some trees were already in bloom, and the wind carried that fresh, earthy scent that only shows up at the start of spring. The rental was exactly as pictured, clean, simple, comfortable. The bedroom was at the front of the house, with a window that looked directly onto the gravel path leading from the gate to the front door. There was a small kitchen just behind it, a cozy living room with a fireplace, and a bathroom off the hall. Nothing extravagant, just enough space to breathe for a bit. We settled in quickly, walked around the nearby village, had dinner at a small pub just up the road. That first night, we went to bed early, around 10 p.m. We were both tired from the travel and happy to be somewhere calm. It was one of those thick, silent nights. No cars, no wind, no sound at all. Just stillness. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I remember it wasn't from a dream or any noise inside the house. It was just that sudden, cold awareness type of waking, like my body knew something wasn't right before my brain did. I was on my side, facing the bedroom wall, and everything was quiet. I didn't move. I just listened. That's when I heard it, the soft click of the gate unlatching. The sound was subtle, like someone trying not to make any noise, but it was clear. Metal meeting metal. Then the slow creak of the gate swinging open, a slight pause, and then it clicked shut again. Not hard, not slammed. Just enough force to secure it. My stomach tightened. I rolled onto my back and stared up at the ceiling for a second, trying to register what I'd just heard. It wasn't wind. The night was completely still. The sound was deliberate. Someone had just come through the gate. I sat up slowly, not wanting to wake my wife. My pulse was already rising. I moved toward the window, crouched just low enough not to be seen, and peeked out through the small slit between the curtains. At first, there was nothing. Just the gravel path, the dark bushes on either side, and the motion light mounted above the front door sitting dark. Then I heard the gravel crunch softly, bare feet or soft shoes trying to muffle the sound, but not succeeding entirely. Step, pause, step. My chest felt like it was being squeezed. Someone was trying to sneak toward our door. Slowly, carefully. The motion light suddenly clicked on with a mechanical hum and a sharp burst of white light. I flinched, and for a split second I could make out a figure's shadow dart against the stone wall outside the bedroom. Not the person, just the shadow. A fast, smooth shape that moved quickly out of the light's reach. I didn't think. I shot up from the bed, heart hammering, and went straight into the kitchen. I pulled the biggest knife from the wooden block on the counter. My hands were shaking, but I gripped it hard enough that the joints in my fingers started to ache. I didn't care. I walked straight to the front door. Every step felt like a drumbeat in my chest. The floorboards creaked under me, and I cursed them silently. I reached the front door and stood beside it, knife raised slightly, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No gravel crunch. No sound at all. I waited, pressed tight against the wall. My breathing was shallow. I could hear the blood thumping in my ears. The motion light outside clicked off. Everything went dark again. And then I heard it, fast footsteps crunching the gravel. Running, and the sharp metallic slam of the gate swinging open and then violently shut. Just like that, it was over. I stayed there frozen for another full minute. My knuckles were white on the knife handle. I didn't move until I heard my wife behind me, whispering that the person took off running when the light went out. She'd been awake. She saw the shadow like I did. She heard the footsteps. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. I stayed up, sitting in the living room chair, knife still close. Every noise outside had me standing, looking through the curtains. But there was nothing. No one came back. In the morning, everything looked completely normal. There weren't any footprints or signs of damage, but the gravel path had clearly been disturbed. There were shallow scuff marks that hadn't been there before. I followed them from the gate to the front step. The air felt colder than it had the day before, though maybe that was just in my head. The gate still worked fine, and the lock on the front door was untouched. But that didn't mean much. We called the rental property manager and explained what happened. They were apologetic, but said there had never been any reports of break-ins or anything strange in the area. Maybe it was just someone drunk, they said, or someone who wandered onto the wrong property. I nodded and thanked them, but I didn't believe that for a second. The way that person moved, the way they opened the gate so quietly and then crept toward the house, they knew exactly where they were. They didn't trip, they didn't hesitate. They weren't confused. They were trying to sneak in. I thought about that shadow, the one that flashed against the wall when the light came on. It wasn't hunched. It wasn't fumbling. It was upright, steady, and smooth. Someone experienced. Maybe a local. Maybe someone who watched the house. Maybe someone who had been there before. We left the next day. Cut the trip short. I told my wife I just wasn't feeling well, but she knew the truth. I couldn't shake the image of standing there in the dark, knife in hand, listening for movement that never came. The silence had been the worst part. The waiting. What's haunted me since then isn't what could have happened if they got in. It's what could have happened if I'd opened the door. If I'd jumped out and surprised them. I don't know what they were holding, what they were ready to do, what they wanted. But I do know I was ready to hurt them. Not out of rage or panic, just out of survival. That part of me I don't think I'd ever met before that night. The part that holds a knife steady and waits to strike. And then they ran. As soon as the light went out, they took off like they were waiting for the darkness. They didn't try the door. They didn't make a sound. They just fled. Was it someone looking for an easy break-in? A burglar who didn't expect someone to be awake? Or was it something worse? Someone who wanted to get in while people were sleeping? Someone who didn't plan on taking anything? I think about that night a lot, more than I probably should. I think about how close it came to something terrible. How thin the line is between a peaceful holiday and a nightmare. That knife in my hand felt heavier than it should have, like it meant more than it should have. I didn't sleep well for weeks after we got home. Still don't sometimes. That rental house was lovely during the day. Quiet, well-kept, charming. But now, in my memory, it's always nighttime. Always that cold gravel path. Always that silent moment standing at the door waiting. And always the shadow that moved faster than I could react, vanishing just before I could do anything. I don't know who they were. I don't know what they wanted. But I do know they were real. That night happened. And every time I think about it, it still makes my skin crawl. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I almost did. I don't remember the day it happened. I was only 4 years old when it happened. My mother had full custody after the divorce, so I didn't see my father very often. My memories of him, if they were even real, were nothing more than vague flashes. A deep voice maybe, a blurry face smiling down at me. Or maybe I just invented those images later to fill a hole I couldn't describe. He wasn't part of my life long enough to leave behind anything solid. Just a name, a few photographs, and a story that ended one day on Highway 84, between Lubbock and Abilene, out in the flat nowhere of West Texas. They were coming to get me. That's the part that hits the hardest when I let myself think about it. My father, his new wife, and my baby half-brother. They were driving from Albuquerque to Houston. I was staying with my aunt there for the summer. He was supposed to pick me up for a few weeks, sometime with Dad, a plan that seemed simple enough on paper. But somewhere on that long stretch of highway, the baby started crying. I imagine it was hot. Probably late morning, the sun already heating the asphalt until the heat shimmered on the edges of the road. They pulled over to check on him, just for a moment. They parked on the shoulder of the highway. My stepmother probably climbed into the back seat to check his diaper or feed him. Maybe she was cooing, trying to calm him down. The truck came down the hill going 70. The driver was past his legal hours, probably half asleep. The shoulder wasn't wide there, and he must have drifted just enough. There was no time to react. The collision was violent and immediate, and when the fuel ignited, it turned into something worse. Something final. No one in the car made it. Only the driver survived. I don't remember getting the news. I don't remember anyone sitting me down to explain that my father, the man who I barely knew but who still belonged to me in some distant way, was gone. That I wouldn't get to see him again. That I had a baby brother I would never meet. That a woman who might have loved me like a son died in a place she never meant to stop. I think my mind blocked it out. Maybe I didn't understand. Maybe adults talked in hushed tones and assumed I was too young to know what had happened. Or maybe I cried for a few days and then just moved on, not really knowing what I'd lost. Time does strange things to early memories. They melt, they vanish, and they leave behind empty rooms in the back of your head. I never thought much about it growing up. The story came up sometimes when extended family talked about the accident. I knew it had happened, but it was like hearing about a movie I'd never seen. It didn't connect to anything I could feel. But then I got older. I graduated high school and got accepted into Texas Tech University in Lubbock. I was excited about it. It was far enough from home to feel like a real move, but close enough that I could drive back to Dallas for holidays and long weekends. I didn't think about the route I would take. The first time I drove to Lubbock, I left from DFW early in the morning. I wanted to beat traffic, get out ahead of the sun. I packed some snacks, loaded my phone with music and podcasts, and hit the road. I didn't even realize I was on Highway 84 until I passed through Sweetwater and saw the signs for Snyder. It was just another stretch of road. Flat fields, cotton farms, the occasional radio tower. That trip was uneventful. But the third or fourth time I drove back and forth along that highway, something clicked. I remembered a story, an old memory of someone saying, between Lubbock and Abilene. I pulled over at a gas station and looked it up on my phone. And there it was, a news article from the late 90s, archived on some outdated local newspaper website. The photos were low-res, the fonts were boxy and uneven, but the story was clear. The names matched. The date matched. The location matched. They had pulled over to calm the baby. The driver of the semi had been cited for driving past his federal limit by several hours, a violation that contributed to his fatigue and the accident. Witnesses said the car was almost torn in half. Fire crews arrived, but there was nothing they could do. The fire had done its work by the time they got there. One paragraph stood out. It quoted a local man who had called 911 after seeing the flames from his home across the highway. He said he'd been standing on his porch when he heard the impact. He ran to the edge of his property and saw the smoke. He called for help, but the fire had already started. And then, years later, in a follow-up article, someone asked him if he still remembered the accident. He said yes, and he said something strange. He said that sometimes, in the early morning fog or just before sunset, he still saw what looked like a young couple with a baby walking along the edge of the highway, heading east, never waving, never stopping, just walking, always together, always quiet, heading toward a place they never reached. I didn't believe in ghosts. I still don't, but reading that shook something loose in me. It was like a weight dropped from the sky onto my chest. They were coming to get me. They were heading to Houston to see me. And I never got to see them again. The man who made me. The brother I never held. A woman who might have become family. And they burned to death on the side of the road while I sat in someone's living room, watching cartoons and waiting for people who never arrived. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up looking for more information. I dug through old forums, scanned archives, clicked through pages of memorials and DOT records. I even found a photo of the crash site. It was taken from a distance, from across the highway. The car was unrecognizable. A melted shape, blackened metal, smoke still curling up from it. The baby's car seat had been flung a few feet away, half crushed, still buckled. I printed it out. I don't know why. I kept it in my glove box for months after that. Eventually, I made up my mind. I had to see the spot. Not just drive past it, but actually find it. Stand there. I didn't know what I expected to feel. Closure? Guilt? Some connection I never had? I don't know. I just knew I had to go. I waited until the next break from school. Thanksgiving. I left early in the morning again, like before, and this time I stopped in the town of Snyder and started asking around. I went into a small diner, the kind where everyone knows everyone else, and I asked the waitress if she remembered an accident back in the 90s involving a family and a semi-truck. She did. It surprised me. She wasn't even that old, maybe in her 40s, but she nodded immediately. That was a bad one, she said. I was in high school when it happened. People still talk about it sometimes. She gave me directions. I followed them out of town, past fields and oil rigs, until the shoulder started to narrow and the grass on the side of the road turned rough and dry. And then I saw it. Or maybe I just knew it. There was nothing special about the spot. No marker. No scorch marks. Just a bare patch of shoulder where the ground looked a little lower than the rest. A dip in the earth where something might have once burned. I pulled over and got out of the car. The wind was dry and hard, pushing against me as I stepped into the grass. Cars rushed by now and then, but otherwise it was quiet. No buildings. No trees. Just sky and flat land stretching in every direction. I stood there for a long time. I didn't cry at first. I just looked. I imagined the car parked there. I imagined the sound of the baby crying, the door opening, the footsteps, the moment the truck came over the hill. I imagined them, people I never knew, people I belonged to, and then it hit me. I sat down in the grass. The wind blew dust into my face. I didn't care. I let it come. I cried in a way I hadn't in years. Not loud, just quiet, steady tears that wouldn't stop. It wasn't grief, not really. I didn't know them. It was emptiness. A hole I hadn't realized had always been there, open and hollow, sucking at the edges of my life. I said nothing. I just stayed there. Eventually, I stood up. I brushed off my jeans. I walked back to my car. Before I left, I took a photo of the spot. Just the dirt and the grass and the sky. A picture of nothing and everything. That was years ago. I never told my mom about that trip. I never told my friends either. It didn't feel like something I could explain. I went back once more before I graduated. I brought a small stone with me and buried it by the edge of the road. No marker. No sign. Just something to leave behind. I don't stop there anymore. But every time I drive past that stretch of highway, I slow down. Just a little. I glance to the side. And for a moment, I think about them. Not as ghosts. Not as wandering spirits. Just as people who never made it. People I never got to know. People who were trying to get to me. And I try to live with that. Not in guilt. Not in fear. Just in memory. Just in silence. Just in respect. Because sometimes the people we lose leave behind more than memories. They leave behind roads. Routes. Spaces in our lives that stretch open and stay open. Waiting. Empty. Full of all the things that could have been. And in those moments, I remember to be careful. I remember to stay awake. I remember to call the people I love. To say it while I can. Because it only takes 1 second, one driver too tired to blink, one small cry from the back seat to change everything. And sometimes there's no coming back. When I was about 8 years old, there was this day at school that never left my memory. It didn't seem like anything special at first. The weather was normal, dry, kind of dusty like it always was around that time of year. The bell for recess rang, and we all spilled out into the yard like we always did, scattering toward the swings, the monkey bars, the patchy grass where we played tag, or tried to outdo each other with clumsy cartwheels. The air had that familiar mix of warm sun on concrete and the faint smell of cafeteria food leaking out through the vents behind the lunchroom. Nothing was out of the ordinary, until I noticed a strange little group of kids standing near the back of the school building, near the old storage room. That storage room was never anything we paid attention to before. It was just a small, ugly door wedged between the gym and the maintenance shed. It always looked locked, and even if it wasn't, none of us really cared what was inside. It was one of those places that existed on the edge of your awareness, never important enough to think about. But this time, there were at least 7 or 8 kids clustered around the door, whispering loudly and making weird, nervous gestures with their hands. Their faces were pale, like genuinely pale, and there was a kind of tension around them that I didn't recognize at first. They were frozen halfway between excitement and fear, and that strange mix made me feel like I needed to get closer. I walked toward them, not thinking much of it, just drawn in by the way they kept pointing at the door and warning others to stay away. They weren't just whispering for attention either. There was something real in the way they looked at each other, something urgent. One of the older kids held his arm out like a barrier to stop anyone from getting too close, but no one wanted to go near it anyway. They kept saying the same thing over and over again, like a broken record. "There's an eyeball looking through the keyhole." I didn't understand what that meant at first. An eyeball? Like someone was inside? Or was it like a fake one, like a prank? One kid had said it so clearly, and his voice had cracked when he said it. That stuck with me. He looked dead serious, even a little shaken. His hands were stuffed into his sleeves, like he didn't know what to do with them. I kept trying to understand what they were reacting to. It seemed so over the top. Why would an eyeball scare them that much? I waited for a few seconds, and then stepped a little closer slowly, like I didn't want to spook anyone. They didn't stop me, though a couple of the kids gave me wide-eyed looks that made me hesitate. I looked at the old wooden door. It had chipped paint, this off-white color that had browned at the edges, and a rusted metal handle. Right above the handle was a keyhole, the kind of old-fashioned keyhole you don't see anymore. It was tall and narrow, the kind you could probably peek through if you bent down just right. So I did. I leaned forward, my heart suddenly thudding harder than I expected. I didn't even know why. It's not like I believed there was a real eyeball in there, just floating or staring or whatever. I didn't even have a clear idea of what I was expecting to see. Maybe it was just curiosity. But the second I got close enough to look through the keyhole, everything changed. There it was, an eyeball, staring right back at me. It was so clear, so real. The skin around the eye was pale, just like mine, and the lashes were thick and dark. The iris was brown, kind of like mine too. It wasn't blinking or moving, just staring, and not like it had just been sitting there, waiting. No, it felt like it had just opened the second I looked. Like it had been watching for someone to peek, and locked eyes with me the second I did. I didn't have time to process it. I just snapped backward like someone had slapped me. I felt this jolt shoot through my spine, and I lost control. I stood there in shock as the warmth spread down my legs. I had peed myself, right there in front of everyone. Some kids gasped. Others looked away like they were trying not to laugh, or maybe were too freaked out to react. I remember one girl turning her face away quickly, and another boy taking a step back like he thought the door might explode or something. Everything became kind of a blur after that. I barely remember being led away, but I know I ended up in the nurse's office. I sat on that cold vinyl cot while the nurse called home. She was nice about it, didn't ask questions, just handed me a spare pair of sweatpants from the lost and found bin and told me to lie down for a bit. I lay there thinking about what I'd seen. That eye, how it had felt like it was meant for me, how still it had been. Not moving, not shifting side to side, not even blinking, just watching. Later that day, after lunch, word got around that the janitor had gone to check the storage room. Some teacher must have heard about the commotion and wanted it handled. We weren't there when he went in, but the story spread quickly. It wasn't locked, just stuck from the inside. The janitor went in with a flashlight, expecting maybe an animal or some prank from the older kids. What he found was nothing. Well, not nothing, but not what we expected. He found a large rectangular mirror propped up on a couple of stacked boxes, leaning directly against the inside of the door. It had apparently been stored there during some classroom renovation and never moved. When someone approached the door and bent down to look through the keyhole, Their own reflection was staring back at them. That's all it was. It made perfect sense. The lighting was dim in the room, but just enough filtered in from the high windows to bounce back a faint image. When you got close enough and the light hit right, it showed you yourself. That was it. I remember hearing about it from a friend in the hallway. Just a mirror, he said. Just you looking at yourself. I nodded like I understood, like it was funny now. But something about it still sat heavy in my stomach. Because even though I knew the explanation made sense, even though I understood the science of reflections and angles and how mirrors work, I couldn't forget the way that I had looked at me. Not like I was looking at myself. Not like I was looking into a mirror. It had felt like someone else was looking through. But I kept that thought to myself. Maybe it really was just me. Maybe fear and imagination can twist things that fast. Maybe I was just caught up in the moment, surrounded by other scared kids, letting that panic settle into me and shape what I saw. Still, I avoided that storage room after that. Even when we played tag and someone ran past that end of the building, I'd take the long way around. I never looked at that keyhole again, never even glanced at it. Because even though I knew the truth, some part of me couldn't forget how cold I felt when I saw that eye. How still it was, how real it felt. It taught me something, not about ghosts or monsters or anything like that, but about fear, real fear. The kind that starts from the inside and grows fast, faster than your thoughts can keep up with. The kind that can make your body act before your brain even understands what's going on. That day stayed with me. The embarrassment faded over time, and people eventually stopped bringing it up. But even now, years later, when I see a keyhole or a mirror at a strange angle, my mind goes back there, to that quiet little storage room and the reflection I thought wasn't mine. And I still don't like to look too closely, just in case. It was summer. Not one of those overbearingly hot, sticky days, but the kind that felt just right. The sun was out, bright but not punishing, and there was a soft breeze moving through the leaves overhead. It was just after 5 in the evening. I'd finished work, and like most days, I was walking home through the local park. This was a habit, really, something I'd done for years. It cut maybe 10 minutes off my walk compared to going around the long way. And during the day, it was a lively, comfortable place. People laying out picnic blankets, kids throwing frisbees, elderly folks walking their dogs, joggers passing by, students sprawled under trees with headphones in. Familiar. Normal. I was in my mid-20s. Old enough to be wary, young enough to still brush off that wariness when it felt too dramatic. This park, despite being a no-go zone after dark, felt safe in broad daylight. I'd made the same walk dozens of times, maybe more. There was a particular gate in the middle of the park I always used, rusty black iron, always slightly ajar, and it led out onto a side road that brought me directly into my neighborhood. That was the route. Routine. Predictable. I didn't think much about it. But on that day, I noticed something off before I even reached the gate. There were 2 young men standing by it. Late teens, early 20s maybe. Asian, I think, though that wasn't what made me take notice. It was the way they stood, not quite lounging, not quite relaxed. One of them was leaning against the gate, his body turned so that it was half blocking the entrance, and the other was closer to a bush just off the path. He wasn't doing anything exactly suspicious, just standing there, but something in the back of my head tugged. It was like a quiet tap on the shoulder from somewhere deep inside. I kept walking, my footsteps steady, but my mind had already started turning things over. I wasn't a paranoid person. I prided myself on being calm, logical. So I told myself not to overreact. There were people around. Families, kids, people walking dogs. It wasn't some desolate alley at night. It was daylight. Broad daylight. Still, the closer I got, the more that subtle alarm in my gut started to grow. The kind of warning that you can't exactly explain, but you'd be stupid to ignore. When I was maybe 15, 20 feet from the gate, I noticed something that made my stomach turn over. One of the 2 guys, the one near the bush, slipped behind it, vanishing from my line of sight. It wasn't a casual move. It was quiet, intentional, like he didn't want to be seen. I slowed my pace just slightly, still pretending to be casual, and that's when the other one, the one blocking the gate, suddenly called out to me. "Hey, you got the time?" He said it too loud, sharper than necessary, like he wanted my attention right then, to stop me, to hold me there. I didn't reply. I didn't even look at him. Because in that exact moment, I saw what I hadn't before. Just past the gate, parked slightly off to the side, was a car. Nondescript. Gray. And around it, partially obscured by the angle of the bushes, were at least two more people crouching down by its side. One of them was almost fully hidden, but I could see a hand, a knee, the edge of a shoulder. Not standing. Crouching. Every hair on my body stood up. My mouth went dry. I didn't need a psychology degree to piece it together. The guy shouting at me was a distraction. The one behind the bush was waiting for me to get closer. And the others, God knows what they were planning, but they were hiding too. Hiding. In broad daylight. In a public park. I didn't stop walking. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I simply turned on my heel and started moving in the opposite direction. Fast. Purposeful. Like I'd just remembered something or forgotten where I was going. I didn't want to show fear. But inside, I was full of it. Drenched in it. My chest was tight. My hands were already starting to shake. Behind me, the same voice shouted again. Oi, oi, you, what's the time? Still I didn't answer. My pace quickened even more. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if they were following. If they were walking toward me now. If the ones by the car were getting up. I just focused on the path ahead. I knew there was another exit, further around, past the duck pond and near the children's play area. I'd never been so grateful for a park to have multiple exits. Every step I took felt heavy, like I was wading through water. I could feel my breath catching in my throat, like I was trying to breathe through a straw. People passed me, an old woman throwing breadcrumbs to pigeons, a man pushing a stroller, a jogger with a sweatband and earbuds, but I didn't speak. I didn't stop. My legs kept moving. I reached the second gate, this one near the road that ran along the outer edge of the park, and slipped through it without breaking stride. I didn't look behind me. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I did, I'd lose my nerve. Or worse, I'd see them coming. The second I got onto the main road, I sped up even more. I crossed the street, didn't wait for the light. A car honked, and I didn't care. My feet were almost running, but not quite. I didn't want to draw attention, even now. I just needed to get home. Block after block, I scanned windows, glanced down alleyways. I checked shadows. I looked for reflections in the storefronts. I had no proof they were following me, no sound of footsteps, no echo of voices. But I felt like prey. Hunted. My skin crawled the whole way. When I finally got to my building, I fumbled my keys so hard I dropped them. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely pick them up. I must have tried 3 times before the key finally turned in the lock. I shoved the door open, slammed it shut behind me, threw the bolt, and leaned back against it with all my weight. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, breathing hard, staring at the opposite wall of my apartment. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat. My heart was thudding like a drum in my ears. I stood there for a full 10 minutes, just leaning, just letting the quiet settle in. It took that long for my hands to stop shaking. Later that night, I kept replaying it all in my head. Every movement, every glance, every step, trying to convince myself I wasn't overreacting. That maybe they were just a bunch of guys hanging around. Maybe I misread it. Maybe the car had nothing to do with them. But deep down I knew. I knew. The way that one disappeared into the bush. The way they were crouching near the car. The way the guy shouted, not curious, not casual, but like he wanted to stop me. It didn't make sense to prepare something like that unless you had an intention, unless you had a plan. The what-ifs haunted me. What if I had gone through that gate? What if I had answered his question? What if I'd stopped walking, given them time to circle around me? What if they dragged me into that car, in the middle of a sunny day, in a park full of people? That's what got me. The fact that even with people around, dozens of them, something could have happened. Fast, quiet, just far enough off the main path that no one would notice until it was too late. I could have vanished. I didn't report it. I told a couple of friends, and they agreed it sounded off. But what would I say to the police? No crime had actually happened. No one had touched me. No one had followed me. I didn't know the make of the car. I didn't get license plates. I didn't even see all of their faces. But it left a mark. That kind of fear, the sudden, primal kind, does something to you. I never used that gate again. I stopped walking through the park altogether. Even in daylight. Even when it was crowded. It just wasn't worth it. From then on, I took the long way home. Because it wasn't paranoia. It wasn't in my head. I trusted that gut feeling. and it probably saved my life. Or at the very least, saved me from something I'd never fully recover from. And I think about that moment sometimes, not in nightmares, but in quiet moments. Crossing a street, sitting at a red light, washing dishes. I think about how normal that day started, how close I came to something dark, how quickly things can shift from safe to not. And I thank myself for listening, for turning back, for not brushing it off. Because the worst things don't always happen in the dark or when you're alone. Sometimes they wait in the daylight, hidden in plain sight, just past the edge of what feels familiar. I was outside playing with my friends one afternoon. We were probably 9 or 10 at the time. It was just another regular day in the neighborhood. Blue sky, warm sun, the kind of day where you'd stay out until the streetlights came on. We lived in a quiet area, not too busy, just a mix of ranch-style houses, gravel driveways, and a few trees scattered around the yards. There weren't many cars going up or down the road most of the time, especially not in the middle of the day. We were in my friend's front yard, tossing a ball around and just messing around like kids do, not thinking about anything serious. We had no idea something weird was about to happen. At first, we didn't really notice the truck. I think it passed once or twice before we paid any attention. It was an older model, kind of rusty, with faded blue paint. Nothing really stood out about it right away. But after it drove by again and again, always slowing down just a bit when it came near us, we started to take notice. It would come from one end of the road, pass by my friend's house, and then about 10 minutes later, we'd see it come back from the other direction, repeating the same thing. I remember thinking maybe he was just lost, or maybe he was looking for someone. That happens sometimes. But then we saw something that made it feel different. As he passed by again, I noticed the man inside was holding something up in his hand. It took me a second, but I realized it was one of those old handheld camcorders, the kind people used back in the early 2000s before everyone had phones. He had it aimed right at us, pointed through the open window on the driver's side. He wasn't even trying to hide it. That's when the fun stopped. All of us just stood there in the yard, watching him as he passed slowly, the lens pointed right at us. We didn't wave. We didn't smile. We just stood there frozen until he turned the corner again and disappeared. None of us said anything right away. We all looked at each other, waiting for someone else to say it out loud first. I felt a pit form in my stomach. My heart started beating faster. I didn't like it at all. It didn't feel like someone who was just passing by or taking random video. It felt targeted. We were just kids, but we weren't stupid. After maybe the 4th or 5th time that truck came by, we couldn't take it anymore. As soon as it was out of sight again, we ran straight into my friend's house. His mom was in the kitchen, and we told her what we saw. She didn't seem too panicked, but I could tell she was taking it seriously. She told my friends they needed to stay inside for the rest of the day. Then she looked at me and said I needed to go home. That part still sticks with me, even all these years later. I tried to explain that my mom wasn't home right then, that she was probably still at work and wouldn't be back for a while. But it didn't matter. She said I needed to go, that it would be fine, and that I should just run straight home and lock the door behind me. She didn't offer to walk with me. She didn't call anyone. She just shut the door behind me and told me to go. I stood at the edge of the driveway for a few seconds, looking down the long stretch of empty road ahead of me. My house was about a mile or two down, maybe more depending on how you count it. It wasn't far in a car, but it felt like forever when you were on foot, especially as a kid, especially when you were scared. I took off running. I didn't stop to think. I didn't even look both ways. I just ran. My shoes pounded against the pavement, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breath, hard and fast. I wasn't in shape or anything. I was just a regular kid, but fear made me move faster than I ever had before. Every second, I kept imagining that old blue truck coming up behind me. I imagined the sound of tires rolling slow across the asphalt, the engine humming behind me, the window rolling down, that camcorder lens pointing right at my back. I didn't even want to turn around and check. I didn't want to know. I kept my eyes on the road, on the mailboxes I passed, on the cracks in the pavement. I remember the sun was starting to dip a little lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. Every time a bird rustled in a tree or a dog barked behind a fence, my whole body would jolt. My legs burned. My sides started to ache. I wanted to stop and catch my breath so bad, but I didn't dare. At one point, I thought I heard an engine. I wasn't sure. It could have been my imagination, or it could have been someone else just going about their day. But that was enough to make me push even harder. I sprinted until my legs felt like rubber, my hands clenched into fists, my throat raw from dry air. It took maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20, to make it home, but it felt like hours. When I finally saw my house at the end of the road, it was like a weight lifted off me. I ran up the driveway, slammed the front door behind me, and locked it. I went through the house and locked the back door too, just to be safe. Then I sat on the floor by the couch, shaking and sweating, staring out the window to see if that truck would come by again. But it never did. I don't know if the guy had been following me or not. Maybe he just kept going in circles near my friend's place and never noticed me leave. Or maybe he saw me leave and decided not to do anything with other people still out in their yards. I'll never know for sure, but the fear of it stuck with me. A little while later, my mom came home from work. As soon as she stepped in the door and saw my face, she knew something had happened. I told her everything, the truck, the man with the camera, how I'd been sent home alone even though I was scared. She was furious. Not just angry, but the kind of anger that builds up and simmers under the surface. She called my friend's mom right away and chewed her out over the phone. I couldn't hear everything she said, but I heard her voice shaking with rage. I didn't go back to my friend's house for a long time after that. The police were called eventually, I think the next day, but nothing really came of it. They said they'd send someone to patrol the neighborhood and asked a few questions, but we never saw the truck again. No one knew who the man was or why he had been recording us. Some people said he was probably just some weirdo, maybe mentally unstable, maybe just passing through. But that never sat right with me. You don't pass through a neighborhood 5 or 6 times in a row, slowing down each time, pointing a camera at kids in a yard. You don't do that on accident. For weeks after that, I was scared to go outside by myself. I kept looking over my shoulder, flinching every time a car slowed down near our driveway. Even walking to the mailbox felt risky. My mom started making sure someone was always home if I was going to be around. She even rearranged her schedule for a while just to make sure she could pick me up if I needed it. I think she felt guilty about not being there when it happened, even though none of it was her fault. Looking back, I know I was lucky. It could have been so much worse. That guy could have stopped. He could have grabbed one of us. I could have been walking home and never made it. I think about that sometimes, how close I might have come to something really bad. It's strange how something so small, just a truck driving by, can change the way you see the world. After that day, I learned not to trust people so easily. I learned that danger doesn't always look like danger until it's too late. And I learned that sometimes, adults don't always make the right decisions, even when they think they're doing what's best. I never forgot that man's face. I saw it for only a few seconds each time he passed, but it burned into my memory like a scar. The way he never smiled, the way he stared straight ahead like he didn't care who saw him filming us. Like we weren't even people to him, just something to look at. Even now, I double-check my locks at night. I look twice when I see a car parked too long on the side of the road. And sometimes, when the neighborhood gets too quiet, I think about that truck. And I remember running, faster than I ever had in my life, just hoping to make it home. I was around 11 years old, and I remember that night like it was yesterday, though it feels like a nightmare I've tried to forget ever since. It started like any other night. I had gone to bed early, feeling tired from a long day at school, and I drifted off without much trouble. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater and the occasional creaks from the wooden floorboards settling. The shadows from the streetlights outside stretched long across my bedroom walls, painting strange shapes I barely noticed as I lay under my blanket. But then I woke up. It was the middle of the night, maybe around 2 or 3 in the morning. I'm not exactly sure what made me open my eyes, but something didn't feel right. My chest tightened, and my breath hitched as soon as I realized there was someone in my room. The darkness seemed thicker, heavier, like it was pressing down on me. Then I felt the weight. Someone was on top of me, straddled across my body, and before I could move, a big, rough hand covered my mouth and nose. I couldn't breathe properly. Panic slammed into me, but what terrified me even more was the cold, hard voice that whispered right next to my ear. He told me to roll over and not scream. I was frozen for a second, the fear so overwhelming it felt like my body was shutting down. But somehow, I managed to obey, slowly rolling off the bed onto the cold floor. The rough hand was still there, pressing against my face, trying to keep me quiet. I tried to scream. I really did. But when you are truly terrified, sometimes it takes a moment to find your voice, as if the fear itself wraps around your throat and squeezes. My first attempts came out as muffled gasps and barely their sounds. It was frustrating and terrifying at the same time, the urge to scream and call for help battling against the silent panic gripping me. Then, just as I was about to give up hope, I heard it, my mom. She must have heard my weak, desperate noises. I think she had been sleeping in the room next to mine. The door burst open, and suddenly the man was struggling against her, trying to keep control. She fought with everything she had, screaming and hitting, her small frame against his much bigger one. He was at least 6 feet tall, and she was barely 5'3", but her courage made him hesitate. In the chaos, the man broke away and bolted straight for the window he had come in through. The window had been left open, something that would haunt me later, and he slipped out into the night before anyone could catch him. My mom immediately locked the window and called the police. I remember sitting on the floor, trembling and shaking, trying to process what had just happened. My body was stiff, and I could barely believe I was alive. The whole house felt different after that night, like the shadows were waiting to creep back in, and I wasn't safe anymore. The police came and took my statement, but they never found the man. It was like he disappeared off the face of the earth. They checked the neighborhood, talked to people, but no one saw or heard anything. I was told to be careful, to keep my doors and windows locked, and to always tell my mom if I felt unsafe. But the fear didn't go away so easily. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep without my mom checking on me. Every creak or sound made my heart race. I was scared to be alone, scared of the dark, and scared that he might come back. The feeling of that rough hand over my mouth and nose haunted me in my dreams, and I would wake up gasping for air. But the worst part wasn't the memory itself. It was how it changed me. I stopped trusting strangers, even people I barely knew. I stopped feeling safe in my own home. And even though my mom was my protector, the night had shown me how fragile that safety could be. Over time, the panic lessened, though it never fully disappeared. I learned to be more careful. Windows and doors were always locked, and I kept a flashlight next to my bed. I told myself that what happened was rare, that the man probably moved on, but a small part of me knew some dangers never fully go away. The police never caught him. He never showed up again. The house stayed quiet. But every time I closed my eyes at night, I could still feel that hand pressing down, trying to silence me. And I knew, without a doubt, how close I had come to something far worse. When I was 7 years old, I walked to my babysitter's house alone almost every weekday. It wasn't a big deal, not in my mind at least. The walk was short, just a block or so from the edge of the schoolyard. I didn't cross any major roads, or even have to wait at intersections. My school was one of those small-town elementary schools where most of the kids walked or biked, and the babysitter lived in one of the little old bungalows just down the street. My parents worked full-time, and this arrangement had worked just fine for years. I was proud of being allowed to walk there on my own. It made me feel grown-up. The sidewalk was familiar. I knew the cracks and weeds pushing through them. I knew where the broken fence slats were, which lawns had dogs behind them, which ones didn't. I used to count how many steps it took to get from the school gate to her driveway. I'd hum sometimes, or drag a stick along fences. Nothing strange had ever happened, not once. Until that day. I remember the sky being overcast. It was probably early fall because I still had my light jacket on, the blue one with the red sleeves, and I hadn't started wearing gloves yet. I was holding my backpack tightly with both hands, the straps bunched up in my fists. I don't know why I remember the weight of it so clearly, but I do. It felt heavier than normal that day. Maybe it was my lunch kit and a library book, or maybe it's just that everything after that moment became hyper-detailed in my head. I had just passed the first house after the school fence when I heard the car. The sound of tires slowing on pavement. Not stopping, just slowing. I didn't turn to look right away. Lots of cars passed by there, parents picking up kids, teachers going home. I kept walking, but something about the way the car moved made me glance over my shoulder. It was a light brown sedan, the kind of car you don't really notice. Nothing fancy, No bumper stickers, no visible dents. Just an old, ordinary four-door that had that dull, washed-out look older cars get after a few years in the sun. It was creeping along the curb, pacing me. I stopped. The car stopped too. The man inside was leaning across the passenger seat, trying to get my attention. His window was down. He looked normal. Not like some horror movie villain. Not unshaven or wild-eyed or anything. He had short brown hair and pale skin and a kind of heavy face. He was wearing a green shirt, button-up, and his arm was stretched across the seat as he motioned to me. I froze in place. He kept gesturing, like trying to wave me over, but his movements were stiff, almost frustrated. His mouth moved in sharp motions. I couldn't make out every word at first because I was still trying to process what was happening, but then it got louder. Come here. Come here. Come here. I didn't move. My feet were cemented to the sidewalk. My fingers clutched the straps of my backpack, so tightly my hands hurt. I just shook my head. I didn't even realize I was doing it at first, just a slow, panicked shake. No, no, no. He stared at me. Not angry, not wild, just staring. Then his face changed, his jaw tensed, and his eyes narrowed like he was deciding something. Then he spoke again, and this time I heard every word clearly, as if he wanted to be sure I did. Stay away from Christina. Then he drove off. No tires screeching. No dramatic U-turn. He just pulled forward and turned at the next block like he was any other driver going home after work. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just stood there, heart racing, until I could no longer hear the car. Then It started with a hiking trip I hadn't even really planned for. My brother had backed out of a weekend outing to the lake last minute, so the cabin we rented was sitting empty. I'd already taken the time off work, packed my gear, and had food ready, so I figured I'd go alone. I'd done solo hikes before. I wasn't new to being out in the woods. I told myself it would be a peaceful weekend to reset, away from my phone, away from the buzz of the city. The cabin was deep in the woods, on a side trail off an unpaved forest road, about 20 miles from the nearest town. It wasn't anything fancy, just a one-room structure with a small front porch, a couple of cots, a fireplace, and a propane stove. It had no electricity, no running water. But it had a strong roof, solid walls, and a padlock on the door. That was good enough. I arrived Friday afternoon. The road was rougher than I remembered, with ruts that scraped the underside of my old SUV, even at a crawl. By the time I parked and hauled my gear up the last quarter mile to the cabin, my legs were burning. I unlocked the door, swept out some dried leaves and a few dead bugs, and set my gear on the cot near the window. I spent the evening collecting firewood and checking over the place. I was in a decent mood, listening to the rustle of the wind through the trees, breathing in the earthy scent of pine and moss. I cooked some instant noodles, sat on the porch as the sun went down, and just watched the trees turn dark, shifting to silhouettes against the orange sky. I turned in early, crawled into my sleeping bag, and fell asleep to the crackle of the fireplace. That first night was uneventful. I woke up once to pee and noticed how thick the darkness was outside. There was no moon, no wind, not even the call of an owl. It was so quiet it made my ears ring. I didn't like how my flashlight seemed to stop just a few feet out, swallowed by the trees like they were smoke instead of solid wood. I didn't linger outside. I zipped back into my sleeping bag and fell asleep again with no trouble. The next morning, I made oatmeal, packed my day bag, and set off for a loop trail I'd seen on a map nailed to the cabin wall. It was an old paper map, yellowing at the edges, but it marked a 6-mile loop that climbed a low ridge before circling back through some denser forest and rejoining the access trail to the cabin. I took a compass, 2 bottles of water, a knife, and some granola bars. I left my phone in the cabin. There was no signal out here anyway. The hike started well. The trail was overgrown in places, but it was still there, a narrow dirt path winding through thick ferns, stepping over fallen branches, ducking under limbs. The ridge climb wasn't too bad. I reached the top before noon and rested on a flat rock. I watched the clouds drift over the treetops. Somewhere below, a stream trickled. I chewed a granola bar and enjoyed the quiet. The back half of the trail was slower. The trees grew closer together, and the canopy blocked out much of the light. The air felt different, cooler and damper, like the ground never dried out. The path was harder to follow here. It faded in places, broken by fallen logs or patches of thick underbrush. A few times I had to backtrack to find where I'd gone wrong. I was maybe 4 miles in when I noticed the first odd thing. It was a tree, a big one, maybe 3 feet wide at the base. Its bark had been stripped clean off, not like from an animal, but shaved smooth in a wide, straight band about waist high. About 6 feet around the trunk, a ring of bark was gone, like it had been scraped with a blade or a sharp tool. I stopped and stared at it. The exposed wood was pale and slightly damp, like it hadn't been long. There were no claw marks, no chew marks. Just one clean, stripped ring. I looked around, trying to see if there were others like it, but everything else looked normal. The woods were still quiet, but not completely silent. I could hear birds. A squirrel jumped through some branches nearby. I moved on, telling myself maybe someone had come through with a machete or a knife for some weird reason. Maybe it was just a marker. But then I saw another tree like it, maybe 10 minutes later. Same thing, same height, same clean ring. This one had shavings on the ground beneath it. They looked fresh, not yet blown away or damp. I crouched and picked one up. It curled like a wood shaving from a carpenter's plane. This time, I felt a chill creep up my back. This wasn't something random. Someone had done this, and recently. I kept walking, faster now. I just wanted to get back to the cabin. I checked the map in my pocket, using the compass to make sure I was on track. I figured I had maybe 2 miles left. The trail wound down into a hollow, then should climb up again before leveling out near the cabin's side trail. But as I moved downhill, the path disappeared again. I stepped over a thick root and realized I couldn't see where the trail picked up. I turned in a slow circle. Everything looked the same. Ferns, trees, damp ground. I walked a few steps in what I thought was the right direction. Nothing. I turned back. Still nothing. I forced myself to stay calm. I pulled out the compass, aimed in the direction the trail had been going, and kept walking. The woods got thicker. The trees were packed tighter, and thorns tugged at my pants. I pushed forward for another 20 minutes before admitting I was lost. I stopped and drank some water. I tried to orient myself with the map again, but it was hard without clear landmarks. I figured I had drifted off course to the left. If I turned right and kept moving, I'd hit the trail again eventually. So I turned and started walking. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was wind. Just a faint sound, like leaves rustling. But it didn't move like wind. It stayed in one place, behind me, steady and slow. I stopped and listened. The sound stopped too. I took a step. It started again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps. Behind me. Not mine. I didn't turn around. I didn't run. I just kept walking, a little faster now, pretending I didn't hear it. Every few steps, I'd stop. So would the sound. Sometimes there'd be a long pause before it started again. Always the same distance behind me. I kept walking for what felt like an hour. My legs were tired, my throat dry. I didn't want to stop. Eventually, I saw something through the trees. A shape. Not a person. It was man-made, rectangular, dull-colored. A structure. It was an old shack. I approached it slowly. The wood was gray and warped. The door hung half open, no lock. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. The roof sagged, and there were gaps between the boards. Inside, it was dark, but I stepped in anyway. It had one room, empty except for an old metal drum in the corner and some broken glass on the floor. I backed into the far corner and crouched there, trying to control my breathing. My ears strained for any sound outside. Nothing. Just silence again. Then, just as I was starting to think maybe I'd imagined it, I heard something brush against the outer wall. A soft scrape, then a slow tap, like a fingernail on wood. One tap, then another, then nothing. I didn't move. I sat there for what felt like a long time. My legs went numb. Eventually, the light outside started to dim. I knew I couldn't stay there all night. I had no flashlight, no food left, and I was getting cold. When I finally stepped out, the woods were still quiet. No footsteps, no tapping. I didn't see anyone. I picked a direction and walked. It was almost dark when I finally saw the glint of something ahead, metal. My SUV. I'd stumbled back onto the forest road, way off from the cabin trail. I don't know how, but I'd looped around. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. I drove back to the cabin fast. I didn't care about the bumps or the low branches scratching the paint. I parked, unlocked the door, went inside, and locked it behind me. I didn't eat. I didn't light a fire. I just crawled into my bag and lay there, shaking. I didn't sleep much. Every time I started to drift off, I thought I heard something outside. A stick cracking, a rustle. Once I was sure I heard breathing, but I never saw anyone. At first light, I packed everything in 10 minutes flat. I didn't sweep the floor or fold my bag. I didn't care. I carried everything down to the SUV in one trip, tossed it in the back, and left. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. Back in town, I bought coffee and sat in a gas station parking lot for over an hour. I just sat there, staring at the dashboard. I didn't tell anyone what happened. What would I say? A few days later, I went online and started looking up that forest area. I found some old posts about missing hikers. One guy went out in 2016 and never came back. His car was found parked by the same trailhead. Search parties found no trace. Another went missing in 2019. Same area, same story. No signs of animals, no injuries, just gone. I haven't been back since. I still hike sometimes, but only with people I know, and never that deep. I think about those stripped trees sometimes, about the footsteps, the tapping, the old shack with nothing inside. Someone was out there, and they didn't want to be found. I never really liked driving at night. Something about the long stretches of black road, the way the trees huddle just beyond the headlights, the feeling of being completely cut off from everything familiar. But that night, I didn't have much of a choice. My job had sent me to a training workshop in a small town almost 4 hours from where I lived. The sessions had gone late, and by the time I was ready to head back, it was almost 10:30 p.m. I could have stayed the night, but my hotel room was musty, loud, and the thought of sleeping there again made me more tired than the drive ahead. I fueled up, got a coffee, and started the drive back. My GPS showed the fastest route went through a long stretch of rural backroads. No major highways, no traffic. Just tree-lined roads and farmland. At that hour, I figured I'd make good time. I could be home by 2 a.m. if I didn't stop too long. The first hour was fine. The roads were empty, the music low, and the coffee kept me sharp. Then the scenery began to change. The towns got smaller and further apart. I passed gas stations that were long closed for the night, old barns that leaned like they were tired of standing, and miles of thick forest crowding both sides of the road. By midnight, I hadn't seen another car in a while. That never sat well with me. I liked the presence of others, even just headlights passing by, reminding me I wasn't completely alone out there. But it was dead quiet. Just the sound of tires on asphalt, and my wipers squeaking now and then, brushing away the mist that had started to settle. Around 12:15 a.m., I noticed something weird. My headlights hit a large reflective sign on the right side of the road. One of those yellow curve warnings, but just behind it, something moved. A quick motion, too fast to make out. I slowed down instinctively. My first thought was a deer, maybe a coyote. But the way it moved, it wasn't like any animal I'd seen before. It darted low and fast across the narrow shoulder, back into the trees. I passed the spot slowly, eyes scanning the woods. Nothing, just thick underbrush and pine trunks. I shook it off. Probably just a raccoon or fox startled by the car. Another 15 minutes went by. I was deep in the woods now, no houses, no lights. Then my car dinged, a low tire pressure warning. I glanced at the screen. Rear left tire. I slowed, felt the pull a bit, and knew I had to stop. I hated the idea. Middle of nowhere, pitch dark, but I couldn't risk shredding the tire. I found a shallow turnout, maybe an old logging road, barely wide enough to get off the main road. I pulled in slowly, angled the car so I'd have enough light from the headlights to see the tire. The road sloped down slightly into the trees, and the gravel crunched under my tires as I eased to a stop. I got out. The air hit me immediately, cool, damp, filled with the smell of moss and wet leaves. The mist was thicker here, curling around my legs. I bent to check the tire. Definitely low, almost flat. I popped the trunk, pulled out the small jack and donut spare. As I worked, I kept glancing around. It wasn't any sound that triggered me. It was the silence. There was no wind, no insects, not even the creaking of trees. Just the tick-tick-tick of my cooling engine and my own breathing. Then I heard it. A crunch, faint but clear. Not from the road. From the trees, behind me and to the left. I stood up slowly, holding the lug wrench loosely in my hand. I peered into the trees, but the mist and darkness swallowed everything past a few feet. I waited. Nothing. I told myself it was an animal again, or even just the woods settling. I went back to work, faster now. Got the flat off, lined up the spare. Then another sound. Closer this time. Not a footstep exactly, more like something brushing branches. I froze again, eyes fixed on the dark wall of trees. Still nothing visible, but I knew something was out there. I tightened the last lug nut, tossed the flat into the trunk, slammed it shut, and got in the car. I locked the doors immediately. My heart was pounding as I turned the key. The engine started, and I breathed a little easier. I threw it into reverse, backing carefully onto the road. As I shifted to drive, I glanced at the rearview mirror. There was a shape standing in the trees at the edge of the turnout. I slammed on the gas, tires spitting gravel as I sped off. My eyes flicked to the mirror again, but the shape was gone. Just trees. I kept going, not letting off the gas for a long while. I drove like that for miles. No turns, just a straight, narrow road cutting through the woods. I was shaking, breathing shallow. I told myself it had to be a tree stump or a shadow. My brain playing tricks. But I couldn't forget the way it looked, tall, narrow, too still to be natural. Around 1:30 a.m., I saw something ahead. Flashing lights. Red and blue. Relief hit me hard. A police cruiser. I slowed as I approached. The cruiser was angled across the road, blocking it completely. The driver's door was open, but no one was inside. The emergency lights blinked silently, washing the trees in bursts of color. I stopped the car about 30 feet back. Something felt off. I didn't see any sign of an accident, no flares, no debris. I waited, engine idling. No one appeared. I honked once. Nothing. I should have backed up right then. Should have turned around. But I got out. I kept my headlights on, my door open, and walked slowly toward the cruiser. I called out, but my voice sounded small, swallowed by the trees. The cruiser was empty. Engine running, radio crackling softly. There was a flashlight on the ground near the front bumper, lens smashed. And on the driver's seat, a smear of something dark. Not a lot, just enough to make my stomach drop. I backed away slowly, got back in my car, and reversed down the road. I didn't stop until I found a side road wide enough to turn around. I drove the long way home, detouring 40 minutes out of my way just to stay on better lit roads. I didn't see another person or vehicle for the rest of the drive. I got home just after 3 a.m. I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, replaying everything in my head. I couldn't shake the image of that shape in the trees, the way the flashlight had been smashed, the smear on the seat. I called the county sheriff's office later that morning, told them I'd seen a cruiser out on that stretch of road. They transferred me a few times, asked for details. Then they asked me to come in. I did, told them everything. They didn't say much, just nodded, took notes. 2 days later, I got a call from a deputy. He told me the cruiser I'd seen belonged to Officer Garrett, a local cop who had gone missing that same night. He had been responding to a call about a man seen walking along the road, looking disoriented. They found the cruiser right where I described it. No signs of a struggle, no footprints. Just his flashlight. No blood. No Garrett. They never found him. I didn't tell them about the shape in the woods. Didn't mention the sounds, the feeling that something was watching me. What could I say? That I saw a shadow? But I know what I saw. I've replayed it 1,000 times. Something was out there that night. Something real. Not a ghost. Not a monster. But something alive. Something that knew how to stay quiet. How to hide. And maybe how to wait. Since that night, I don't drive at night anymore. Not alone. I avoid back roads. I make sure my tires are checked and double-checked. And I never stop in the woods. Not for anything. Because I still think about that thing in the trees. Whatever it was, I don't think it was alone out there. And I don't think it was done. I had taken a few days off work and decided to do something different. I'd been cooped up in the city for too long, surrounded by traffic, phones buzzing nonstop, and artificial light that never let me truly rest. I wanted to get away from all of it. No people, no schedules, just some peace and quiet. I had some experience with hiking and camping from when I was younger, so I figured I'd drive out to a state forest about 4 hours from where I lived. I'd found a section on a map that wasn't part of any major campsite. Just trees, a couple creeks, and long, winding trails that cut through areas most people didn't bother to reach. I packed up my gear, tent, sleeping bag, food for a few days, flashlight, extra batteries, portable stove, water filter, a good knife, and a pistol I kept locked in a case in the bottom of my pack. I wasn't worried about people. It was mostly for peace of mind in case of animals, or just in case something went wrong. I left early in the morning, drove out, and by late afternoon I was already deep into the woods, having hiked a few miles off the main trail. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees when I found a small clearing between some dense pine and oak. It felt right, hidden, quiet, with enough flat ground to pitch a tent. I set up camp quickly, boiled some water for a pouch of freeze-dried stew, and ate while listening to the wind move through the trees. No cars, no voices, just the occasional creak of branches, the distant sound of a woodpecker hammering away, and once, the flutter of something darting through the bushes nearby, probably a squirrel or a rabbit. When night came, the air turned cold fast. I pulled on my heavier jacket, zipped up my sleeping bag, and climbed in. The forest at night was darker than I remembered. No streetlights, no glow from buildings, just complete black, and the sounds that came with it. I lay there, staring at the nylon roof of the tent, listening. At first, it was peaceful. Then it wasn't. It started with footsteps. Not fast, not stomping. Just soft crunches like someone, or something, was stepping slowly through the woods. I held my breath and waited. Maybe it was a deer. I've seen videos of how quietly they move. But it kept going. I heard a stick snap, not far from the tent. Then silence. I stayed completely still, heart thudding against my chest, ears straining. The footsteps didn't come closer. Eventually, they faded off. I waited maybe 20 minutes, listening, trying not to make a sound. Nothing else happened. I told myself it was just an animal. Maybe a fox or even a raccoon. It made sense. Still, I didn't fall asleep easily that night. Every little noise set me on edge. I kept my flashlight next to me, my hand on the knife tucked under the corner of the sleeping bag. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. In the morning, I stepped outside the tent, stretched, and checked the area. Nothing looked disturbed. I didn't see any prints, though the ground was packed pretty tight. Still, the forest had a strange feeling to it. I shook it off, made some instant coffee, and decided to do a long loop on foot, taking one of the lesser trails I'd marked the night before. It was supposed to curve up through a ridge and come back down through a gully where a small creek ran. The hike itself was good. The ridge gave a nice view of the treetops, and I took my time, stopping every now and then to just breathe. Around midday, I reached the creek, filled my bottle using the filter, and sat on a rock to eat. As I was packing up, I noticed something odd. Across the creek, maybe 30 feet away, there was an old fire ring, just a small circle of blackened stones with some ashes and half-burnt branches inside. It didn't look ancient, but it wasn't fresh either. No smoke, no footprints around it. I hadn't seen it on the map. I stared at it a moment, unsure why it gave me a strange feeling. People camp in random places all the time. I've done it, but still, something about it bothered me. I moved on, got back to camp by late afternoon, and started preparing for the evening again. I couldn't shake that weird feeling, like I wasn't alone out here. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees even though I knew how paranoid I was being. Still, I decided to make a small change. I moved my tent about 20 yards deeper into the trees, just far enough that someone walking by wouldn't see it unless they were looking hard. It was just for my own peace of mind. That night, I skipped the fire and went to bed early. I lay there, eyes closed, listening again. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were slower, more deliberate. They circled, once, maybe twice. Then they stopped. Nothing for at least an hour after that. I didn't sleep. By morning, I was worn out, tense, and seriously questioning why I'd even come out here. But I wasn't ready to quit. I told myself it was just nerves. I needed to relax. So I spent the day close to camp, gathered some wood, did some sketching in a notebook I brought, and tried to calm myself down. The forest didn't feel so bad when the sun was up. It was still quiet, but peaceful in a different way. That night, the footsteps didn't come, but something else did. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of a zipper. Not mine. I froze. My tent was zipped shut, and I hadn't moved. I listened, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. Then I heard it again, slow, deliberate zipping, like someone was either opening or closing a tent. But it wasn't mine. I didn't see any other tents. There shouldn't have been anyone else out here. Not this deep. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe loudly. After about 5 minutes, everything went quiet again. I stayed there, absolutely still, until the sky began to lighten just a bit. When I finally stepped out of my tent, I didn't see anything at first. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. About 30 feet away, just past a line of trees, there was a patch of trampled grass. A fresh one, and in the middle of it, a long, black zippered pouch, like the kind you'd find on the outside of a big hiking pack. I walked over to it slowly. It wasn't mine. I hadn't brought anything like it. The zipper was partially open, and inside there were a few items: a rolled-up pair of socks, a partially used bar of soap, and a small plastic bag with what looked like dried meat. I backed away from it. Whoever owned that wasn't far. I packed up my stuff fast, keeping the knife on my hip and my pistol close. I didn't take the trail back. I cut cross-country through the woods, moving fast but quiet. I didn't stop to eat, didn't take breaks, just kept walking in the direction I'd marked on my GPS to get back to the car. About halfway back, I noticed something else. Scratches on the trees. Deep ones, maybe knee-height, like someone had taken a knife or some kind of tool and dug into the bark. They weren't old. The wood inside was still light, and the shavings were fresh on the ground. I found another one maybe 50 feet later. Then another. They weren't random. They were in a line, almost like a trail marker, but not official ones. It took me longer than I expected to get back to the car. When I finally saw the faint glint of my car's windshield through the trees, I nearly cried. I practically ran the last 100 yards. I threw my gear in the back without organizing it and got inside, locking the doors. I didn't turn the engine on right away. I just sat there, catching my breath, trying to figure out what the hell had happened out there. As I pulled out onto the dirt road, I checked the rearview mirror again and again. Nothing. No movement. Just trees. I didn't stop driving until I hit the highway, and even then I didn't feel safe. Something about the whole trip stuck with me like sap on my skin. When I got home, I unloaded my gear and noticed something else. On the bottom of my tent, on the outside near the door, were two small smears of what looked like dirt, or maybe mud. I hadn't noticed them before. They were at just the right height and distance to be from someone kneeling, hands pressed against the fabric. I don't know what their intention was. I don't know how long they had been watching. But I do know that they were close, closer than I ever want anyone to be without me knowing. I reported what I saw to the local ranger station, told them there might be someone living off-grid, or stalking campsites, or maybe worse. They took it seriously, promised to look into it. I never heard anything back. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I haven't gone camping alone. I still go on hikes, still spend time in nature, but always with someone else. I still think about that night sometimes. The footsteps, the zipper, the pouch, and every now and then, when I walk through a quiet patch of woods, I catch myself listening for footsteps. I haven't heard them again, but I always listen. It was late October when I decided to take a solo hiking trip out to a remote part of northern Idaho. I had time off from work I hadn't used all year, and I didn't feel like being around anyone. The past few months had been rough. My girlfriend had moved out. My boss was micromanaging everything I did, and I couldn't sleep without waking up in the middle of the night feeling like I'd forgotten something important. I just wanted quiet, real quiet, somewhere far enough from the road that I wouldn't hear cars or planes. Just wind, trees, and my own footsteps. I picked a spot from a backcountry map that showed a valley that cut through two thick ridgelines, with a stream running down the middle. The trail wasn't even marked on Google Maps. It was just a narrow cut that twisted through forest for about 8 miles. There was no cell signal, of course, which was part of the appeal. I printed out a map, packed food for 4 days, and drove out early on a Friday morning. The first 3 hours of hiking were smooth. The air was cold but not freezing, the trail covered in dry leaves that crunched under my boots. I passed through sections of dense pine, then patches of open space where the sun lit up the golden brush. I stopped for lunch by a fallen tree, had a sandwich and some jerky, and kept moving. By late afternoon, I reached the valley. The trail dipped sharply and curved along the side of a slope. I could see the stream below, thin and winding, like a silver thread in the distance. I figured I'd make camp down near the water. It was always better to set up near a water source, though not right next to it. I found a flat area maybe 20 yards from the stream, surrounded by thick pines and set up my small one-person tent. It got cold fast once the sun dropped behind the hills. I layered up, started a small fire, cooked a packet of dehydrated chili, and sat in silence while I ate. No traffic, no hum of anything electrical. Just the distant rush of water and the occasional snap from the trees. It was exactly what I needed. I crawled into my sleeping bag around 9 p.m. The tent walls rustled lightly in the breeze. I remember being half asleep when I heard a distant rustling sound, like something moving through leaves. It wasn't fast. It wasn't the wind, but it wasn't close either. Maybe 50 yards away, if I had to guess. I laid still, heart picking up just a little. I listened for a long time, but heard nothing else. Eventually, I must have drifted off. The next morning, I got up early, stretched, made oatmeal and coffee, and wandered down to the stream to fill up my bottle. I noticed a few marks in the soft mud on the bank. Not boot prints. Not paws either, not really. Just small depressions like something had stepped there, but didn't leave enough behind to guess what. I didn't think too much of it. Around midday, I decided to explore. I packed a small day bag with snacks and water and followed the stream further down the valley, stepping over rocks and weaving through brush. The terrain got rougher the farther I went, steeper banks, fallen logs. I saw animal tracks now and then, mostly deer. At one point I spotted an old hunting blind up on a slope, its canvas faded and frame rusted. I hiked for maybe 3 hours before turning back. On the way, I noticed something that hadn't been there earlier. A section of pine saplings along the slope had been bent. Not snapped, just gently curved down, like someone had pressed through them recently. Again, it wasn't alarming. Could have been an elk or bear. Still, I paused and looked around for a bit, then continued on. Back at camp, I made another fire, cooked dinner, and sat there watching the flames flicker in the fading light. The woods felt quieter than the night before. No breeze, no birds. Just stillness. I finished eating, cleaned up, and climbed into my tent by 10. I woke up around 2 a.m. Something was crunching in the brush not far off. My first thought was deer, but it wasn't moving like a deer. The steps were slower, more deliberate. Then they stopped completely. I laid there, completely still. The moon was out, so the tent wasn't pitch black. I could see the faint outline of the fabric, the way it bulged inward slightly from a light breeze. After maybe 5 minutes of total silence, I heard it again. A single step, then another. Closer. Not fast, but no longer cautious either. My heart started pounding. I reached slowly for the knife I kept inside the tent wall pocket. I held it in my hand and didn't move. The steps got closer. Then they stopped, right outside the tent. I held my breath. My ears were ringing. Every muscle in my body was tight. I could hear the soft sound of breathing, low and steady. Not an animal sniffing or panting, just calm breathing. A person's breathing. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to speak or shout and confirm I was alone. I didn't want to unzip the tent and show my face. I laid there, frozen, gripping the knife so tightly my hand went numb. After what felt like forever, I heard the breathing shift slightly, then slow footsteps backing away. 5 steps, 10, then silence. Nothing. I waited for another half hour before I moved. Then I unzipped the tent slowly and peeked out. I couldn't see anything in the dark, just the faint shimmer of the stream in the distance. I stayed up until sunrise, sitting by the fire pit, knife in hand, not adding wood, just waiting for light. When it came, I checked the area around my tent. I found footprints in the dirt. Human, not boot prints. Bare feet. Wide, flat, no tread. The steps had come from the woods and circled halfway around my tent before disappearing back toward the trees. I packed up, quickly. I didn't eat, didn't make coffee, just broke camp and started back up the trail. The hike out was miserable. I kept checking behind me every few minutes. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, but I never shook the feeling that I was being watched. That somewhere out there in the trees, someone was standing still, just watching me go. I made it back to the car by mid-afternoon, threw everything in the trunk, and drove the dirt road back toward town without stopping. I only felt like I could breathe once I hit pavement again. That night I stayed in a motel, watched TV with the volume too high, and locked the door with every lock it had. I told myself it was probably some homeless guy living off-grid, maybe a survivalist, maybe just some weird drifter. Nothing supernatural, nothing paranormal. A few weeks later, I went back online and searched the area out of curiosity. I found a thread on a small hiking forum from a year prior. Some guy had posted about a strange encounter while hiking that same valley. He said he'd seen signs of someone following him, fresh prints, a piece of bark wedged into the trail in a way that looked intentional, like a marker. At one point, he'd found a pile of animal bones stacked neatly in a circle near where he was camping. He left early too. There were no replies to his post. His account hadn't been used since. I never went back to that valley. I still hike, but only in places with good visibility, multiple trailheads, and some cell coverage. I don't camp alone anymore. Not because I'm afraid of bears or the dark, but because I know what it feels like when someone you didn't invite is standing right outside your tent, in the middle of nowhere, not saying a word, just breathing, watching, waiting, and that kind of silence doesn't leave you. Not ever. It was a Friday afternoon when I decided to head up to the old service road near the National Forest line. I'd taken a few days off work just to get away from things. No calls, no traffic, no noise, just peace and a little solitude. I'd been burned out for a while, and I figured that a quiet trip out to the backcountry would help me reset. I wasn't planning on anything extreme, just a simple drive, camp out in the truck bed, and maybe hike a bit the next morning. The spot I had in mind wasn't anything official. It was an old Forest Service road that hadn't been maintained in probably 10 years. I'd found it by accident a few months earlier while out exploring with my dog. The first mile or so was rough gravel, but after that, it turned to cracked dirt and scattered grass patches. Still, it was passable if you had a decent 4x4, which I did. By the time I was halfway down the road, the cell signal was gone. It always dropped right around a bend where the hillside started to close in. I remember noticing how quiet it was out there, and not in a peaceful way, either. It wasn't just no people or traffic. It was like even the birds and insects had gone somewhere else. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe it was just the weather. It had been overcast since morning. I pulled off the road near a clearing, about 5 miles in, and set up for the night. I didn't bother with a tent. I had a topper over the bed of the truck and a sleeping pad laid out back there. I brought enough food and water for 2 days, a small propane stove, and a portable battery pack. I cracked a beer and just sat on the tailgate, watching the sky change colors through the treetops. The sun dipped behind the hills by 7:30, and by 8 o'clock, it was already dark. I wasn't used to how quickly the forest swallowed up the light. I turned in early. It must have been around 9:30 when I crawled into the back of the truck and zipped up the flap. The woods were quiet again, too quiet. Still, I chalked it up to nerves. Being alone out there messes with your head a bit, especially at night. Every creak of a tree or rustle in the brush sounds like something bigger than it probably is. I had a knife and a flashlight close by just in case. I must have fallen asleep pretty quickly because the next thing I remember was waking up in the middle of the night to a faint metallic clink. Not loud, but just enough to bring me out of a light sleep. I didn't move right away. I just lay there listening, trying to figure out if it was real or part of a dream. Then I heard it again, clink, then a short scrape, like metal on metal. It sounded like it was coming from the direction of the front of the truck. I didn't turn on my flashlight yet. Instead, I stayed perfectly still, straining to hear more. The noise stopped for a few seconds. Then it started again. Clink, scrape, then a soft, muffled thud. I slowly unzipped the flap on the topper, just enough to peek out. It was too dark to see anything clearly. The moon was barely giving off any light through the cloud cover, but the silhouette of the truck's front end was visible. Then I saw it, movement. Something low, maybe knee height, moving around near the front driver's side. At first, I thought it was an animal, but it didn't move like one. It wasn't smooth or natural. It was too deliberate, like someone crawling. I held my breath. Who the hell would be out here? There were no other vehicles on the road, no signs of hikers, no camps nearby. And even if someone was camping in the woods, why crawl up to my truck in the middle of the night? I reached slowly for the flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. I waited, hoping maybe whoever, or whatever it was would go away. A few seconds passed. No noise, no movement. Then suddenly, something bumped the truck lightly. Just a small jolt, like someone leaning against it. That's when I flicked the flashlight on and pointed it out through the rear window. Nothing. I quickly unzipped the flap and looked around in every direction. Still nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing straight up. I felt this awful crawling sensation in my stomach, like I was being watched. I stayed alert for a long time, not even sure how long. Maybe an hour. Eventually, the woods went quiet again, and I didn't hear any more noises. I convinced myself it must have been some animal attracted to the food, or maybe something like a raccoon climbing over the front grill. I still didn't sleep well, though. I dozed off in short stretches until morning. When the sun came up, I got out to check around the truck. That's when I saw it. The front hood was slightly open. Not all the way, just popped enough that I could fit my fingers underneath. That made no sense. I hadn't opened the hood at all on this trip, and it doesn't just pop on its own. I lifted it slowly. Everything inside looked normal, battery in place, hoses untouched, nothing obviously missing or tampered with. Then I noticed something small and strange. A clean fingerprint on the dusty paint near the edge of the hood. Just one, human-sized. That's when I decided I wasn't staying another night. I packed everything up quickly and started the engine. Thankfully, it turned over without any trouble. Still, I felt uneasy the whole time. The feeling didn't go away even after I drove out of there and got back to pavement. For a while, I didn't talk about it with anyone. I kept telling myself I must have imagined the worst of it, but something kept nagging at me. A few weeks later, out of curiosity, I went online and started digging around on backcountry forums. Eventually, I came across an old thread from about 3 years earlier. It was about that same Forest Service road. A guy had posted a warning saying he and a buddy had found what looked like an abandoned camp out there. Torn sleeping bags, rusted food cans, and what looked like a pile of clothes that had been partially burned. He mentioned a strange smell, like spoiled meat and ammonia, and said they reported it. But the ranger station told them the area wasn't maintained and to avoid it altogether. Another commenter mentioned hearing odd metallic sounds at night, like someone messing with his car while he slept. He thought it was a bear until he found footprints circling his car the next morning. Human ones. That was enough for me. I never went back to that road. I still have no idea what really happened that night or who was out there. But I do know this. Someone had approached my truck. They tried to open the hood. They left a fingerprint, and they were careful not to leave anything else behind. To this day, I wonder if they were planning to disable the truck, maybe to trap me there. Or worse. But for whatever reason, they didn't follow through. Maybe they saw me move. Maybe they realized I wasn't asleep. Or maybe they just changed their mind. But I still remember that metallic sound. That clink. That soft scrape. And sometimes, when I park my truck alone in a quiet place, I find myself listening for it again. I remember the first time I realized something was terribly wrong. I had driven far from town, down a gravel road that ended near an abandoned farm. I needed to deliver a part to a friend who was working on restoring the old barn. I hadn't been invited to stay long, just drop off the part and turn around. It was mid-afternoon, dusty light filtering through high clouds, the crops already harvested, fields empty and dry. The house on the property was silent. Windows boarded, paint flaking. The barn leaned at odd angles, beams broken, one side sagging. I got out of my truck carrying the small metal part. The ground was uneven, rocks underfoot. I heard the buzz of insects. A dog barked somewhere beyond the fields. I called out once. My friend didn't answer. I set the part on a low beam inside the barn and turned to leave. That's when I noticed it. Footprints in the dust floor, fresh, heading deep into the loft area. I frowned. Who else could be here? I climbed wooden steps, moving carefully as old boards creaked. The dust under my boots left prints that joined those already there. I kept going until I reached a small window high on one wall. Outside, I saw nothing but dry land and empty skies. I cleared my throat and called again. No answer. My heart pounded. I reached into my pocket. Phone dead. No signal. I tried again, nothing. I glanced down at the stairs. That's when I saw movement. Shadows between the rafters, shifting. It felt like someone was watching me. I froze. The barn was still except for the faint scuttering of rats or mice. I backed slowly toward the steps. My boot hit something soft. I realized it was a mitten or glove, dusty, old. I bent and picked it up. Inside, faint blood stain. My breath froze. I looked around. No one appeared. Then I heard a creak down near the ground. A door scraping open. Fear made me stiff as a board. I sprinted down, slipping on loose boards. I hit the ground floor, and crashed into the open field outside. I ran to the truck, heart hammering. I climbed in, locked doors, engine barely turned over. As soon as I was moving, I glanced in the rear window. I thought I saw someone standing just beyond the barn's broken plank wall. I drove off fast, dust kicking up behind. At home I shook badly. The radio sounded distant. I sat in silence for a while. Then I stared at the glove, cleaned it carefully under water. It was small, half-size like for a woman's hand. Thin. I realized it didn't belong to my friend. And the blood spot meant something gone wrong had happened here. Later that evening the police came. I described everything: footprints, glove, movement, the person beyond the window. Officers looked through the barn. They found no bodies, no signs of anyone living there. No hidden rooms. They dusted for prints, found mine only. They said maybe I had imagined the movement, or there was a trespasser long gone. They took the glove for tests. Days passed. I could not shake the feeling I had left something behind, someone in trouble. I returned during the day. The barn was still empty, the glove gone. Police radio said no human DNA on gloves. Water damaged it. No match to missing person reports. My friend said he'd forgotten to lock a shed near the tool room, but had no idea of any trespasser. Still, I felt unsettled. At night I woke hearing wood creaking, though no wind. My dog barked, stared at corners. Sleep was thin. I started carrying pepper spray, driving with doors locked. Months later I got a letter. It came by mail, handwritten. Envelope unmarked. Inside, a short note. "Thank you for coming. All is well." No signature. I stared at it, shook. I felt fear and relief tangled. The barn. Was someone calling out to me? Or taunting? I kept the note. Then local news reported a body found in another county, near a similar derelict barn. A woman. Investigation said she'd been missing for weeks, wandered away from town. Identified by family photos. No signs of foul play. Cause of death: dehydration, exposure. They found a single glove near her remains, one matching the pattern of the glove I saw, but it was stained with her blood. The other glove never found. I sat on my porch reading. No police called me. They said no connection, different jurisdiction, no evidence. But I knew. The glove I'd seen must have belonged to her. She'd been inside the barn, maybe trying to escape or hide. She must have died there before wandering off on her own. She dropped the glove, left footprints that I'd followed. Then she collapsed outside. My hands shook. I felt sorrow, but also a calm certainty. I'd helped, even unknowingly. I'd noticed her glove, raised alarm. The note: someone knew I came. Maybe a relative or someone who found the glove and was grateful I had come that day. The body find gave her family closure. Before, they had no idea where she went. That evening I stood by the barn again. I let the low sunlight fall on the field. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. I felt sadness for her story ending that way, alone and frightened, but also a sense that her story now ended cleanly. Discovered, identified, returned to her kin. Her death no longer a mystery. The glove that held a blood stain, once unknown, now linked to her. I left a flower at the spot near the barn's entrance. Quiet. Sun on my face. No more shadows seemed to linger. The land seemed open, empty, but the heaviness had lifted. I drove home with gratitude in my mind. I had listened to a small sign, looked closer, and in doing so helped bring a kind of peace. The ending felt right, not magical but real. A lost person found, a family no longer waiting. And I, a stranger, had made the difference. I woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding. The sheets knotted around my legs. The room was dark, but not pitch black. Just enough moonlight filtered through the curtains so I could make out the shapes of familiar furniture. I lay perfectly still, listening. At first I thought the sound was in my head, the faint tap-tap, like raindrops dripping on the window frame. But it wasn't rain outside. The tap-tap tapped again, steady, slow, coming from the hall just beyond my bedroom door. My breath caught. I clenched my hands under the covers. The tap-tap repeated, then stopped. It felt like someone was shadowing me, waiting. I had moved into this old house only a few weeks ago. It was quiet, isolated, a little out of town near a wooded area, perfect for writing. But tonight the isolation felt heavy, oppressive. I could feel my pulse in my ears. Finally, I forced myself to shift just enough to peek at the door. In the dim glow I saw movement, a small flicker of something dark. I couldn't think. I felt sweat gathering behind my neck. I wondered if something had come in through the window. Maybe a branch had tapped. But the sound had been deliberate. I pressed my back to the headboard, breathing slow, trying to calm my racing heart. I decided to stay still and wait. 10 minutes passed. Tap. I jumped. It came again. A finger tapped the door from the outside. Then silence. My mean spoon. Should I get up? Should I call someone? My phone was on the bedside table. But I didn't want to draw attention. I was alone here. If someone was out there, were they watching me? I squeezed my eyes shut. My chest felt tight. The next tap came lower down, chest high on the door. Barely audible. It echoed in my skull. There was a deliberate rhythm. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. It felt like an attempt to communicate or intimidate. I could not imagine a casual mistake. My stomach convulsed. I waited some more. Then the knob rattled. Not turned, but rattled, like someone testing if the door was locked. My breath froze mid-inhale. Locked, yes. Locked. I loosened beside the safety chain. My mind raced. The doorknob gave another slight shake. Tap. Rattle. Finally, I could not stand it. I grabbed my phone and flicked on the light. The brightness threw dark shadows across the hall. Nothing. Empty hallway. My senses screamed that someone had been right there. The door swung slightly in the draft of the light turning on. I reached for the handle, but did not open. I trained the flashlight down the hall. Nothing moved. Shaking, I ran across the room and jammed a chair under the doorknob for good measure. Then I sank to the floor, leaning back against the bed. Everything trembled inside me. Time passed. 15, 20 minutes. My mind grew foggy and exhausted. I forced myself to leave the room. I creeped out into the hallway. Heart pounding, I listened. No tap. No rattle. The house was quiet again. I surveyed the hallway. Doors to other rooms closed. At the far end, the front door stood sealed. I turned on the overhead light. Strange how normal it looked now, too still. I hovered in the hallway, flashlight ready. I crept toward the front door. At the bottom of the stairs, a dark shape startled me. I froze. It looked like a jacket draped on the banister. My breath caught. I moved closer. It was indeed my jacket, one I had left there last evening. Relief slammed me, but then something under the jacket caught my attention. Faint muddy imprints on the floor, as though boots had scraped across the wood. My blood turned cold. I knelt down and examined the marks, fresh, dark, smeared. They led toward the living room. I exhaled slowly. I stood and followed them. In the living room, the front door was shut, locked, but the lock had scuffs, like someone had tried to jimmy it. I ran my fingers along the frame. The paint chipped where force had been applied. I realized someone had tried to get in, then tried to see in my bedroom. My legs shook. I retreated slowly back toward my bedroom. I collected my phone, my notebook, my laptop. I stuffed them into a bag. I walked out of the room, chair still propping my door. I paused at the staircase. Should I go out the back? Then I noticed something else. Faint footprints leading to the back door and stops at the windowsill. I looked. They were muddy, slightly damp, matching the ones near the front. Someone had gone all around. I realized they had been inside. They had threaded through the house while I slept, tapping at doors, leaving boot prints, testing windows. The sinking horror settled. They had been watching me. I raced to the back door. I turned the knob, and it turned. It was unlocked. My chest tightened. I slammed it shut and locked it, then bolted. I backed toward the stairs. I slid my hand along the banister rail, searching for more prints. But nothing else fresh. Whoever had been here had left. I sprinted upstairs, jammed the door again, then sat at the foot of my bed, shaking, the bag heavy with my things. I stayed there, breathing, until a weak sun glow started to seep through the curtains. I waited past dawn. At 6, I emerged. No one outside. Car parked in my driveway, my own. No sign of intruders. I called the local police. They arrived. They dusted for prints on the door, the banister, the window frames. They took photos of boot prints. They said the marks were consistent with a heavy military-style tread. They asked if I'd told anyone about living here. I said no. They checked cameras in the neighborhood. Nothing. No footage. They suggested upgrading locks, installing cameras. They promised regular patrol. They left. Next day, I replaced the locks, reinforced doors. I installed motion sensor lights outside and put up a hidden camera inside pointing down the hallway toward my bedroom door. I started sleeping with the door unplugged chain, the chair door block, keys ready. But I slept less. 1 week later, the camera recorded someone moving in the hallway at 2:17 a.m. I watched the grainy footage. A person tall, lean, in dark clothing, boots heavy enough to leave mud. They approached my bedroom door, tapped once, racked the knob, turned away, and slipped back down the hallway. I felt sick. I watched it again. I recognized something. The way they carried themselves, slow, methodical. Not a break-in gone awry. This was planned. I gave the footage to the police. They ran it forensics, but could not yet identify the person. They said this might be stalking. I felt violated in ways I couldn't explain. Over the next month, I kept my defenses high. I installed sensors on windows and doors that pinged to my phone. I changed my routines, hunted out of town, took different paths. But I started to feel stronger. There was fear, yes, but also resolve. I refused to be a prisoner in my own home. Then one morning, I got a call from police. They had identified a suspect, someone living a few blocks over, previously reported for trespassing at vacant properties. They brought him in. When they showed me booking photos, I felt a chill. That's the shape I saw on camera. They said they searched his apartment and found clothing matching the one in footage, boots with heavy tread-matching prints, muddy soles. Even the same raincoat hung near the door railing in his closet, muddy inside him. They asked if I wanted to press charges. My heart thudded. I said yes. Court proceedings followed. In testimony, the suspect's pattern came out. He'd been casing lonely houses at night, testing doors quietly, never stealing, just watching. The judge called it intent to invade privacy, trespass. Not the worst crime, maybe, but the law treated it seriously. He received a prison term, probation, and ordered to pay for my security upgrades. Through it all, I felt vindicated, maybe a bit stronger. Months later, I stand in the hallway where the tread marks once lay. I trace the familiar signs. The door blocks, the camera lens, the reinforced lock. The house feels mine again. I sleep better now. I still keep the system armed, but I don't live in terror. Instead, I live alert, protectively. The quiet now is real. I look out the window onto the empty street and understand. I was watched, followed, but I wasn't powerless. I took action. I demanded that I was safe. The ending is clear. The intruder was caught, justice done, and I emerged wiser, more cautious, but free in my own home again. I remember the moment. It started like this. I got a call from my boss early on a Friday morning, asking me to drive out to the edge of town to check on a property. There had been complaints from neighbors about odd noises and strange activity. I was a property inspector, so I gathered my tools, flashlight, camera, clipboard, and got in my car. The sky was gray and quiet, and the roads empty. I took the highway beyond the city lights until the pavement turned cracked. I pulled in next to an old ranch house, sitting all alone in the fields. The house looked empty and rundown, paint peeling, windows dark. I walked around the outside first. The wind carried a faint smell of mold and earth. The grass was overgrown. I looked at the windows. Some were broken, others boarded. Coming closer, I noticed footprints in the soft dirt near the back door. They were fresh, barefoot prints, small, leading away from the door toward the barn at the rear. My heart skipped, but I reminded myself I was here to inspect. I gripped my flashlight. At the back door, it hung open, hinge screeching as I nudged it. Inside, the wood floor was warped, boards warped upward. Dust layered furniture. The living room ceiling sagged. I scanned with my flashlight. Nothing seemed alive. No rodents, no birds barred in. Just stale air and shadows. I started my inspection. I took pictures of cracks in walls, ceilings, wiring. I heard a faint thump upstairs. My pulse quickened, but it could be wind or a piece of wood settling. I climbed the narrow stairs cautiously. Upstairs, hallway wallpaper peeling, small holes in ceilings. I stepped toward a bedroom door cracked open. Inside was a bed frame without mattress and scattered debris. No sign of any people. Then another thump came from the far hallway. I froze. The silence returned. I told myself perhaps a board shifted. I finished checking rooms. Bathroom bathtub stained, sink cracked. I jotted notes about water damage and structural issues. Then I went down and moved toward the kitchen. Old cabinets hung askew, counters filthy. I moved through into a back hall that led to the barn door. I noticed a faint draft as the back door hung open. I stepped outside. Air felt colder than before. I shone the flashlight toward the barn door. It was ajar. I walked across the uneven ground to that door. Inside, the barn's interior was dim and large. Stalls had old hay, tools leaning in corners. The smell of horses long gone. I moved slowly. In the corner, I saw footprints again, same style bare footprints in dried mud. They led toward the center of the barn. I swallowed hard but pressed on. Better to draw this and report, rather than assume trespassers. As I walked deeper, I caught a flicker of movement behind a stack of crates. I shone my light. Nothing. I moved aside crates. Empty floor. Heart pounding. I spun around, heard breath behind me. I wheeled. Nothing. Silence. My training took over. Do not linger. I planned to leave, finish the rest of outside. But then I saw the footprints at my feet, no longer muddy. They were sharper in the dirt. Only way to trace they had led from the road, through yard into barn, circling back to the house. That meant someone walked all around. At that moment, I heard a shout from the main house, a distant human voice calling. My head snapped, someone inside. I felt raw panic, but forced calm. Silence swallowed it again. I whispered to myself, feet echoing on the barn wood as I backed out. I slammed the barn door behind me and returned onto the yard. The voice didn't come again. I flicked on my phone light and walked back toward the house, noting shadows shifting. Once inside, I moved carefully, flashlight low. In the dining room, I noticed a slight footprint on the floor. Someone barefoot came through. My mind raced. The property was supposed to be empty. Who was here? I moved through the house again, faster this time. I checked the basement door in the kitchen. That door was locked, or appeared locked, but rusted. One push it clicked. I lifted the flap and peered in darkness. A cold draft rose. Something in me said not to go. I stepped back. I went upstairs again to gather my notes, took a picture of the stairwell, and then heard a sliding noise behind me. I turned, a faint shift of curtain in the window, maybe wind. But the only window that could move was facing the yard. Outside, nothing but empty field. My breath steamed. I surged forward down the hall and remembered the front door, open. Someone might slip out. I dashed down the stairs and toward the front entrance. The door frame looked warped. The wood of the frame had splintered, as though someone forced it. I touched the splintered frame, fresh wood, no rot. Meanwhile, I heard a soft scrape at the back door, someone trying to re-enter or leave. I zipped over. Outside again, I saw nothing. The barn door was now closed. The footprints in the yard were fading in clarity under wind. I realized I was not alone, but I never saw them. I called my boss on phone, voice shaking, said I'd leave and call police. He asked if I was safe. I hesitated. I said I'd step out front and hang up. I walked slowly toward the road, flashlight still on. I passed broken windows that looked like eyes. The wind rustled through open spaces. I felt a presence, like someone watching from just beyond the tree line. I forced my pace, stepped onto the road. I turned back and saw the house silhouette, dark, silent but alive with memory. I waited on the shoulder, phone to ear dialing 911. I heard distant sirens approaching. I watched as headlights cut through gray dusk. 2 patrol cars rolled up alongside me. I waved. Officers stepped out, guns holstered, and asked if I was the caller. I said yes, explained property, noises, footprints, voice. They asked if I wanted to go back. I said no, I would not go inside again alone. They approached the house. One officer with flashlight went in through front. I watched from safe distance. After minutes, they emerged empty-handed. They called it trespassers unknown. They'd search and secure later. They asked for my statement. I explained all I saw: footprints, noises, forced door, barn creeps, voice. They took notes. They offered to escort me back to my vehicle. I agreed. Once inside my car, they spoke quietly, said they found evidence someone camped in the barn weeks ago. Makeshift bedding, half-eaten food, but stopped a few days ago. No signs of ongoing stay. They couldn't explain the voice I heard just minutes ago. They said maybe coyotes invent, but voice clear. I felt relief and unsettled. They drove away after escort. I started my car, drove off the dirt road back to town. My hands shook, adrenaline drained. Night fell fully as I merged onto the highway. In the report I filed later, I included photos, footprints, door damage, barn interior. My boss called later that evening to thank me. That night, I slept lightly. I kept remembering that voice calling from inside, distant, panicked, human. Yet no one was found. I thought of the footprints leading everywhere, circling back. Maybe someone entered, wandered, then vanished into thin air. Weeks later, The house was boarded up and sealed by authorities. The neighbors reported no more sounds. The property sold eventually and was torn down. I never returned. But a few nights ago, I dreamt I was standing in that barn, flashlight flickering, and I heard footsteps right behind me. I turned slowly, nothing but darkness. I woke gasping, but the relief comes knowing. No harm, no ghost, no fairy tale. Just a strange, real event that didn't escalate. I survived. I'm safe. I often think, whoever it was maybe needed shelter, got scared and vanished before being discovered. The ending is clear. I walked away alive, reported everything. There was no injury, property officials took over. The mystery remained unsolved, but I was fine. No unresolved danger. Just an isolated incident on a lonely property that has since been cleared. And now I carry the memory and move on, cautious but certain. I made it out, the danger stayed behind, and I'm okay. I woke up in the dark, breathing shallow, my heart pounding so loud I thought someone would hear it outside my door. Outside, a thin shaft of morning light cut across the floor from a gap in the curtains. I lay rigid, muscles tight, as if the tension in my bones would keep anything bad from happening. I felt my palms sweat on the sheets. Something had shifted in the night. Something heavy had come close and left a trace of fear all over me. I forced myself to calm my breathing. One breath in, one out. In that quiet moment, I remembered where I was. Alone in the old house I had rented for the summer, miles from neighbors, the nearest town miles down winding roads surrounded by dense forest and hills. I chose this place for peace and quiet, for time to write. Now it felt like isolation and threat. Slowly I sat up. The sheets were tangled around my legs. I let them fall away and felt the cool air on my skin. I stared at the window. The curtains swayed slightly, but I blamed a breeze. My vision caught something, a dark smudge on the wall opposite. But before I could look closer, the shudder of childhood memory rushed by, telling me that my mind played tricks at night. I shook my head and rose to my feet. The floorboard creaked under me. Sound carried in the empty house. It echoed. I crossed to the wall and held my hand near the smudge. It looked like a smear of dirt or paint, but something about it felt off. Too dark, too uniform. My pulse jumped. I pulled the curtain aside. Sunlight flooded in. The wall looked normal. The smudge vanished. I blinked. I frowned at the old wallpaper. There was a knot in the wood beneath. Cast a shadow. That must have been it. But the tension stayed lodged in my chest. I sat on the edge of the bed, scents of damp wood and old plaster drifting in. A breeze tickled through the tiny cracks around the window frame. I felt alive with fear, completely alert. My hands trembled. I rubbed them. Time ticked by. I waited. At breakfast I made coffee and looked out the kitchen window at the overgrown yard and tall trees. Leaves rustled. Birds chirped. I told myself nature, misfired memory. The day went on. I sat at my desk, pen in hand, staring at the empty page. I tried to write, but every sound made me pause. A cupboard door in the next room had closed with a soft click. I jumped. The roof would groan as the wind shifted. Again I jumped. My mind conjured threats. I finished a few paragraphs. I forced my breathing into slow rhythm. If I stayed in one place too long, the house creaked more, or I perceived it more. So I walked. I went outside into the backyard, boots crunching on gravel. The morning sunshine warmed me. I edged back to the small shed I used to store tools. I opened the door. Inside, rusty tools and old containers. A spider scurried. I shuddered and shut the door, heart still pounding. I took a deep breath. The shed was lonely and silent. Still, throughout midday I felt uneasy. Every long shadow, every muted sound made me freeze. At one point I saw something move in the corner of my eye, in the living room, near the landing of stairs I never used. I looked. Nothing. My breath stilled. I moved to the stairs, placed a hand on the banister rail. It was cold. Faded paint peeled. Dust layered each step. Something behind me made me shift. A floorboard creaked. I clasped my fists. I felt chilled from head to toe. I spent the afternoon cleaning the house. I opened drawers, cleaned counters, wiped dust, thinking rational thoughts. I am safe. This air feels stale but harmless. But the shadow in the corner of the living room nagged me. I cleared the clutter, wiped down the walls, removed dusty objects. Yet that uneasy feeling didn't go away. I lit a candle in the evening. I didn't like electric flicker in old fixtures. The flame gave comfort, gave me something real. The walls glowed amber. The house looked warm. But in the darker corners, shadows clustered. My breath stilled again as the wick flicked. I twisted the candle. I heard a soft thud upstairs, like something heavy dropping. I froze. Candle smoke curled in the air. I strained to listen. Nothing. I realized I hadn't used the stairs in days. I rarely went upstairs. Another thud. Downstairs? No. It came from above. My chest scared me, but I wanted to know. I walked toward the stairs. My legs felt heavy. I reached the bottom and looked up. The stairs narrowed and turned a corner. A landing above disappeared into darkness. I squinted. No light. I thought, maybe an object fell upstairs? Old book, flower pot, a piece of pipe? I stepped up. Each stair creaked under my weight. My ears told me every echo. On the landing I paused. No object. No loud noise. Only faint, like floorboards settling. I went back down. I checked the living room again. I moved furniture, peeked behind drapes, opened closet doors. Nothing. The night deepened. I had a late dinner, trembling hands holding a mug. I tried to steady. I told myself I felt the fear because I was alone, in an unfamiliar house, anxiety eating routines. My mind created shapes. I slept fitfully, dreams of dark corridors, sounds behind walls. The next morning I woke early. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. I felt better in daylight, but that comfort faded as dusk approached. I sat writing at the desk again. I wrote scenes of rural life, of forest paths, of wind among the pines. I hear a scraping noise behind the desk. I freeze. My pulse rushes. A chair shifts slightly. I turn. The chair by the wall, empty, had moved inches. No breeze, windows closed. I stare. I slowly move to it. Inspect the floor. Nothing disturbed. I chalk it to gnarled floorboards. But it didn't sit right. That night I stormed, paced back and forth, checking locks on windows and doors. Every lock clicked. Yet when I tapped the doorknobs, they rattled slightly. I slammed them. The sound compared to impact echoed hollowly. I realized the doors were warped. Locking might not fully engage. Anxiety spiked. I put plates under a door to block movement. My hands shook as I wedged a heavy wooden block. Sleep was impossible. I sat in the living room with a flashlight. The house silent except my ragged breath. The beam traced the room. The walls, the ceiling, dark corners. I scanned. Nothing. But then on the far side, I thought I saw a shape retreat behind the curtain. I snapped the beam. Nothing. I unhooked the curtain rod and yanked the fabric open. Outside, only the fading moonlit yard. I sat heavily on the couch. I realized how thin the walls were, how unsettled the floors. Every crack sounded loud. I told myself, I am alone. Nothing supernatural is here. Still, the dread clung. Then at dawn, light spread across the sky, pink and soft. I crawled into bed. I thought I would finally sleep. I fell asleep, and in that half-dream I heard a crash, a mirror upstairs shattering. I bolted upright, heart slamming. I leapt from the bed, ran to the stairs. Adrenaline in my limbs. I climbed quickly. At the top I saw the shattered frame, shards glittering on the floor. A mirror I hadn't remembered placing so near the hall edge. I stared though I hadn't triggered it. No footprints, no broken pieces other than glass. I looked down the hall. The door to one unused room was open slightly. Slowly it creaked wider. My agency returned. I grabbed a broom handle. I edged toward the door, peered inside. Nothing but dust. The closet pushed half open. Nothing inside. A small chair overturned. Crossed from inside to corridor. The chair's legs scratched the wood. I set it upright. I exhaled. I felt shaky. I turned to go back downstairs and heard a low groan from the attic hatch above me. I looked up. A small wooden trap door cracked open slightly. Shadows beyond. I swallowed. I pushed my hair from my forehead. Fear almost froze me. Then rational thought. The attic door warped. The house settled. The mirror shifted and fell. The hatch, rotten, opened with draft. I used the broom handle to close it. Slam. It tapped shut. I paused. My breath slow. The morning sun poured in through the stairwell window. It looked peaceful. I felt relief sweeping through me. The solidity of daylight warmed me. I touched the banister. No one was there. Only me. And the house was just old. I made breakfast. My hands trembling. I looked at the broken mirror pieces. I cleaned them up carefully, took them outside in cardboard box pieces. I carried them to a trash pit behind the shed. I dropped them in, crashed, shards clinked, then silence. Later, I walked a long loop around the property. A narrow path led past tall grass and pines. I breathed deep. I convinced myself the fear was internal. I reminded, there is no stranger inside, no ghost, no stalker. Only stray animals, birds. Only wind, old wood. I returned to the house at midday. Light and warmth filled rooms. I dusted and cleaned further. I repaired the attic hatch with a stick jam to keep it shut. I taped the attic latch. Night came again. I lit lights early. No candle this time. I felt stronger. I propped the front door from inside. I'd installed a heavy chair behind it. I looked around with calm eyes. I felt secure. I read and wrote until late, but my muscles were relaxed now, not rigid. I slipped to sleep around midnight. I dreamed of walking the forest path by day. Bright sun, normal calm. Morning came. I woke at dawn naturally. I stood at the window. I was between jobs when it happened. I had just quit working as a warehouse supervisor at a distribution center, and I hadn't figured out what was next. I was 32 years old, single, and drifting. I had a little money saved, and I didn't want to rush into the next thing just to end up hating it again. A friend of mine named Darren told me about a place upstate where his uncle had a small cabin near a state forest. He said no one had used it in a few years, and if I wanted some time alone to think, maybe clear my head, it'd be the perfect spot. I took him up on it without thinking too much. I figured a few days off the grid might help me get my head straight. I packed up my old Jeep with enough supplies for a week. Water, food, a sleeping bag, flashlight, batteries, a knife, an old .22 rifle my grandfather gave me years ago that I had never even fired, and a heavy-duty first aid kit. I also had a solar charger for my phone, but I figured there wouldn't be much signal up there anyway. I wanted to disconnect. That was the point. The cabin was about 4 hours north of where I lived, tucked into the edge of a forest preserve near a forgotten road that had more potholes than pavement. The last 10 miles were just gravel and mud, and the GPS went dead about 15 minutes before I reached the gate. It was just a rusty chain looped around 2 wooden posts, with a padlock that Darren had given me the key for. Past the gate, the road narrowed into a trail barely wide enough for the Jeep. The trees closed in fast, the light getting dim, even though it was barely past 2 p.m. The cabin was small, barely more than a shack, but solid. The door stuck when I opened it, the hinges groaning like they hadn't moved in years. Inside, it smelled like old wood and dust. There were 2 small rooms, a main area with a wood stove and a single bed pushed against the wall, and a little side room that looked like it was meant for storage, but was mostly empty. No running water, no power, just a kerosene lantern and a stack of chopped wood beside the stove. I unpacked, set up my sleeping bag, and opened all the windows to let in the air. It felt good to breathe in real, clean air again after years of traffic fumes and warehouse grime. The first day passed quietly. I went for a walk behind the cabin, following a narrow game trail that disappeared into the trees. I saw deer tracks, rabbit scat, and something bigger, probably coyote or maybe a bobcat. The trees were thick, mostly pine and fir, and the underbrush was dense. The kind of place where you could get lost fast if you weren't careful. I kept a mental note of every turn I took and kept the trail in sight. I wasn't planning on doing anything dumb. I just wanted to stretch my legs. By sunset, I was back at the cabin, sitting outside with a can of chili and a slice of bread, watching the last of the light drain out of the sky. The forest got real quiet after dark. No traffic, no airplanes, no people. Just the wind and the sound of insects. It was strange at first, that kind of silence, but not bad. I turned in early and slept hard. The second day, I decided to explore deeper into the forest. I had marked the trail with little scraps of orange tape I had brought with me. Every 100 yards or so, I'd tie a piece to a branch so I could find my way back. I hiked for about an hour, stopping now and then to listen. I didn't see another person, not even a distant voice or far-off engine. It was just me and the trees. I liked that. It made me feel small in a good way. Like none of the crap I'd been dealing with back home mattered out here. On the way back to the cabin, though, I noticed something strange. One of the pieces of tape I had tied was gone. At first, I thought I'd just missed it, But then I looked harder and saw that the branch it had been tied to was still broken at the end where I had bent it to tie the knot. The tape wasn't on the ground either. It was just gone. Maybe it blew off, I thought. But it was heavy plastic, the kind you use for marking trails or construction zones. It doesn't just blow away. I didn't think much more of it then. Just told myself to pay closer attention next time. That night it rained. Hard. I lay awake for a while listening to the downpour pounding the tin roof of the cabin, the wind rushing through the trees outside. There were a few flashes of lightning in the distance, followed by low rumbles of thunder that echoed like drums rolling through the valley. At some point, I must have fallen asleep again, because I woke up to gray morning light and the smell of wet earth. The third day was when things started to feel wrong. I was making coffee over a little propane stove when I saw tracks in the mud outside the cabin. Big tracks. Not animal tracks either. Boot prints. A single pair, coming from the tree line toward the cabin, stopping just a few feet from the porch, then turning back the way they came. I just stood there staring at them, my stomach twisting. They weren't mine. I hadn't gone out there after the rain started, and these were fresh. The edges were sharp. Whoever it was had been there early that morning or sometime during the night. I looked into the trees, my eyes scanning the undergrowth, but I couldn't see anything. I thought about packing up and leaving right then, but part of me didn't want to believe it. Maybe a hunter. Maybe someone else with a cabin nearby. Maybe they were just curious. I tried to talk myself down, but I kept replaying it in my head. Why come so close and then just leave? Why not knock? Why not say something? I kept the .22 within reach the rest of the day. I didn't go hiking. I stayed close to the cabin and checked the windows and doors a few times. Everything was still locked. Nothing disturbed, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept the lantern burning low, sitting on the bed with the rifle across my knees, listening to every creak and snap of the trees. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I thought I heard something outside. Not an animal. It sounded like someone breathing, heavy, slow, just beyond the wall. I held my breath and waited, heart thudding in my chest, ears straining. It stopped after a few seconds. No footsteps, no movement, just stopped. I don't know if I imagined it. I stayed up until daylight. On the 4th day, I found more tracks. Not boot prints this time, bare feet. Long, narrow, almost bony. And not just walking in a line. Whoever it was had circled the cabin. Twice. I followed the trail a little ways into the woods before losing it in the underbrush. I didn't want to go further. I kept turning around to check behind me. I felt completely exposed, like at any second I might see someone standing there watching me from the shadows. I went back inside and started packing. I didn't care how peaceful it was. I didn't care if I looked paranoid. Something wasn't right, and I didn't want to be here anymore. But when I turned the key in the ignition, the Jeep didn't start. Just a low, sick grinding sound. I popped the hood and looked underneath. I'm not much of a mechanic, but even I could see that the battery cables were cut. Not chewed cut. Clean slices through the thick rubber. Someone had done it deliberately. I checked the tires. All 4 were intact, but the battery was useless. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat down hard. My heart was hammering. My hands were shaking. I kept looking at the tree lean, waiting to see someone step out. No one came. That evening, I built a small fire in the wood stove and ate the last of my canned soup. I double-checked the locks again, shoved a chair under the door handle, and kept the rifle loaded and within arm's reach. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. At some point after midnight, I heard it again. That slow, deliberate breathing. This time, I was sure I wasn't imagining it. It was close, right outside the wall behind the bed. I sat there, frozen, not daring to move. The breathing went on for minutes, then slowly drifted away. I didn't hear footsteps, just the wind and the creak of the cabin settling. I made it until sunrise, then grabbed my pack, the rifle, and what food I had left. I wasn't going to sit around waiting to be hunted. I was going to hike out, find the road, and get help. I estimated it was about 10 miles back to the main highway. I could make it in a day if I pushed. I marked the cabin door with a bright red X in case I had to come back and set out. I stuck to the trail, rifle in one hand, constantly turning to check behind me. The woods were too quiet. Even the birds seemed to be keeping their distance. I made good time for the first few hours, but around noon I came across something that stopped me cold. A dead rabbit, hanging from a low branch by its back legs. gutted, skinned, but not eaten. Just left there, swaying in the breeze. The cuts were clean, precise, like they were done with a knife. I didn't touch it. I just backed away and kept moving. By late afternoon, I reached the old gravel road. I thought I was in the clear, but then I saw the footprints. The same long, narrow bare feet I had seen around the cabin, now pressed into the soft dirt at the side of the road, leading the same direction I was heading, not coming or going from anywhere, just pacing the road. I walked faster. I didn't run. I didn't want to look scared, even though I was. Every few steps, I turned and scanned the trees, half expecting to see someone watching me. Nothing. About an hour later, I heard the first sound of an engine in days. A pickup coming from the south. I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms like a maniac. The driver stopped, rolled down the window, and stared at me like I was crazy. I must have looked like hell, dirty, unshaven, wide-eyed. I told him I'd broken down at the cabin and needed a lift. He hesitated, then told me to get in. I didn't tell him everything, just that I thought someone had been stalking me. He nodded like he'd heard it before. Said that forest was full of weirdos, hermits, squatters, people who didn't want to be found. It was one of those early fall weekends where the air starts to shift from hot and sticky to something crisper, where the daylight fades earlier than you expect, and the wind picks up just enough to make you feel like something's changing. My friend Chris had invited me to his cousin's cabin, a place I'd never been before, somewhere in northern Michigan, miles from the nearest small town. He promised peace, quiet, no cell service, and a weekend of fishing, grilling, and sleeping in. I didn't hesitate. I had been exhausted from work and needed to get out of the city. The drive was long. I left Friday around noon, and by the time I turned off the highway onto a gravel road, it was already pushing 6 p.m. The GPS had cut out maybe 30 minutes earlier, and I was relying on Chris's scribbled directions he had texted me. The kind of directions that say things like pass the tree with the red ribbon or go 2.5 miles after the bridge. I followed them as best I could, my tires kicking up dust, my car bouncing over the washboard gravel. The sun had dipped low enough that the trees on either side of the road cast long shadows across my windshield. After about 10 more minutes of driving through narrowing roads and a dense patch of pine trees, I found the turnoff, barely visible, marked by a rusted mailbox and an old chain hung loosely across the entrance. I got out, unhooked the chain, and drove down the path. It was less of a road and more like tire tracks worn through grass and packed dirt. A couple hundred yards in, the trees opened up into a small clearing, and there it was, a plain wooden cabin with a slanted tin roof and a porch made of warped planks. There were 2 vehicles already there. I recognized Chris's truck, but not the other car. I parked, stretched, grabbed my bag, and walked up to the porch. The front door was unlocked. I let myself in. The place was small but comfortable, basic furniture, a wood-burning stove, fishing rods propped in the corner, and that familiar musty smell of a place that's been shut up for most of the year. I called out but got no answer. I figured they might be down by the lake. Chris had mentioned it was about a quarter-mile walk through the trees behind the cabin. I tossed my bag on the old couch, grabbed a beer from the cooler, and stepped back outside. The sky had started turning pink and purple, with streaks of clouds lit up by the last light. I took a few sips and decided to find the others. There wasn't a real path to the lake, just an opening between the trees where the grass was matted down from previous walks. I followed it, hearing the crunch of leaves under my boots and the sound of insects picking up for the night. The forest was thick, mostly pines and some birch, with underbrush that got taller the further I went. I kept going, expecting to hear voices or see the reflection of the water through the trees, but after about 10 minutes, I hadn't seen or heard a thing. I stopped and listened. Nothing. No voices. No birds even. I tried calling out. No answer. I looked back and realized I couldn't see the cabin anymore. I hadn't paid much attention to the turns or splits in the trail. It all looked the same. I wasn't worried yet, but I did feel that prickling unease in the back of my neck. I decided to turn back. I figured either they weren't at the lake, or I had missed the right way to get there. The problem was when I turned around, everything looked unfamiliar. The way I'd come was just trees and undergrowth, no clear trail anymore. I tried to retrace my steps, but the shadows had gotten deeper, and the ground was uneven and confusing. I walked in what I thought was the right direction, then slightly to the left, but after 15 minutes, I still didn't see the clearing. I started to feel the first hints of real anxiety. My heart thudding just a little harder than normal, my hands damp against the cold beer, and I was still carrying. I stopped again and tried to reorient myself. I pulled out my phone, forgetting there was no signal. The screen was almost dead anyway, down to 4%. I used the flashlight just to look around, but all it did was illuminate branches, spider webs, and a squirrel that froze mid-climb, staring at me. I turned it off and kept moving, now genuinely trying to get back. I yelled for Chris a few more times, louder now, hoping maybe he or his cousin would hear me and call back. Nothing. The light dropped fast. One moment I could still see the reddish sky through the trees, and the next it felt like night had fallen all at once. I kept walking, trying to stay in a straight line, hoping I'd pop back out at the road or the cabin or even the lake. But it didn't happen. The woods just got darker and more confusing. At some point, I realized I'd been walking for over an hour. I had no idea where I was. The only light now was the faint glow of the moon filtered through the trees. The wind had picked up too, rustling the branches overhead, and I kept thinking I heard things, twigs snapping, leaves shifting, footsteps behind me. I tried to convince myself it was just animals. A raccoon, a deer, maybe a porcupine, but it wasn't just the sounds. I also kept getting this feeling that I was being watched. Not from one place, but from everywhere around me. Like I had stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to be part of. I finally stopped, leaned against a tree, and tried to calm down. I decided I needed to stay put for a bit, and just listen. Maybe I'd hear Chris. Maybe I'd remember something about the direction I came from. I stood there for several minutes, and just as I was about to give up and keep walking, I heard something. It was faint, but it wasn't an animal. It sounded like a foot dragging through leaves. Then another. Then silence. Then again. It was coming from maybe 20 feet away, but the trees were too thick to see anything. I held my breath. The sound came again, slow, uneven steps. Not running, not even careful, just slow, deliberate. I didn't move. I just stood there, every muscle locked. The sound stopped. I whispered Chris's name one more time. Nothing. Then out of nowhere, a loud, quick crack, like someone stepped directly on a branch nearby, made me jump. I turned and ran. I didn't think, I didn't look. I just ran as fast as I could, dodging trees and stumbling over roots. I had no idea where I was going. I just wanted to get away from whatever was there. I must have run for 5 minutes straight before I slowed down, chest burning, legs shaking. I stopped, hands on my knees, gasping for air. The forest around me was still, silent again, but I knew I was more lost than before. I thought about climbing a tree to get a better view, but everything around me was too tall, too thin, or had no good branches. I walked a little more, slower this time, trying to stay quiet. I didn't want to draw any more attention to myself. After what felt like an hour, I came to a small clearing. It wasn't the cabin. It wasn't the lake. But there was something in the middle of the clearing, an old wooden structure, maybe a hunting blind or a storage shed. It looked completely abandoned. The roof sagged, and the wood was gray and splintered. One of the corners had started to rot, and the door was hanging off the hinge. I approached it slowly. I didn't want to go inside, but I didn't have a choice. It was getting cold, and I was starting to feel dizzy from the stress and lack of food. I ducked inside and sat on the dirt floor, leaning against the wall. I could still hear the wind outside, but the structure blocked most of it. I pulled my hoodie tighter around me and shut my eyes for just a moment. I must have dozed off, because I jerked awake to a sound just outside the shed. This time, it wasn't just footsteps. It was breathing. Deep, slow, ragged breathing, like someone exhausted or in pain. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The sound circled the shed once. Then again. Then it stopped. I stayed completely still for what felt like an hour. Eventually, I heard nothing. No more movement. Just wind. I waited longer, then quietly, slowly, pushed the door open and stepped back outside. The moon was higher now, and the light was brighter. I looked around and didn't see anything. I walked again, now barely able to feel my feet. I kept moving out of fear more than anything else. At some point, I stumbled across something that looked familiar. A tree stump with a deep-cut mark across the top. I remembered passing it on the way in. I followed that feeling. I took a left where I thought I had gone right, and soon the trees started to thin. I pushed forward, heart racing, until finally, I saw the edge of the clearing. The cabin. I ran to it, didn't care how loud I was. I burst through the door, expecting to see Chris and his cousin, but the cabin was empty. Their bags were there, their shoes, but no people. I looked around, checked every room, even the small shed behind the cabin. Nothing. I waited through the night, sitting in the middle of the living room with a knife I found in one of the drawers. I didn't sleep. When the sun rose, I stepped outside. Their cars were still there. I honked the horn on Chris's truck. Nothing. No response. I walked around the area, yelling. Still nothing. I made the decision to leave. I packed a bag, got into my car, and drove back down the path, back to the gravel road, back to the highway. I drove straight to the sheriff's office in the nearest town. I reported everything, getting lost, the shed, the footsteps, the missing people. They searched the woods for 2 days. They found nothing. No signs of Chris or his cousin. No bodies. No campsite by the lake. Not even the old shed I had slept in. They said maybe I imagined it, or maybe I wandered into private land and got disoriented. I knew better. I had been there. That was 3 years ago. I haven't gone camping since. I haven't seen Chris. I still don't know what happened out there. But I dream about it, those footsteps, that breathing, that empty shed that no one else could find. I wake up in sweat, heart racing every time. And I'll never go. I still remember how dry the air felt that morning. It was the kind of dryness that stuck in your throat even if you weren't doing anything. The kind that made every breath feel like it scratched something inside your chest. I was on my 3rd day of a solo hiking trip through a remote part of the desert. Not a full-on sandy dune kind of desert, but the rocky, shrubby, sun-bleached kind with scattered boulders and dried-up creek beds. The kind of place where, if you stood still long enough, you'd start to hear the land settle around you. Or maybe it was your own heartbeat echoing against the silence. The whole idea had started as something I thought would clear my head. I'd been feeling stuck. My job was wearing me down. My apartment was starting to feel like a cage, and I was tired of seeing the same streets, the same people, hearing the same sounds day in and day out. I had been on hikes before, but never alone for this long. I figured 3 days alone in the wild would shake something loose inside me, break the routine, and make me feel more like myself again. I parked my car at a small trailhead a couple hours outside of the last town with decent cell service. There was a ranger station about 10 miles north from where I started, but I wasn't planning on going that far. I had my gear, a pack with a 3-liter hydration bladder, water purification tablets, freeze-dried meals, a lightweight tent, my compass, a printed map, and a backup GPS unit. I had enough supplies for 5 days just in case something went wrong. I had signal when I left the car. I sent a quick message to my brother letting him know I was starting out, and I'd check in again when I got back. The first 2 days went fine. Hot, long, and quiet, but fine. I'd set up camp both nights in small clearings surrounded by boulders, ate my food cold most of the time to save on fuel, and listened to the wind skim across the rock as I tried to sleep. I saw no one else the entire time. That was part of what made the 3rd day feel strange before anything had even happened. That morning, I packed up and set out toward an area I had marked on the map as a side loop. Not part of the main trail, more of a forgotten side path that curved around a wide canyon rim and then reconnected with the trail a few miles further on. It was rougher, more overgrown, and according to what I'd read online, rarely used. I liked the idea of it. It made the hike feel more like mine alone. The beginning of the loop was hard to spot. I only found it because I noticed a pile of sun-bleached rocks that someone had clearly stacked to mark the turnoff. The trail was more of a suggestion than a path, thin traces of disturbed dirt winding through stubborn desert brush. I moved slow to keep my bearings. There were more boulders here, some as big as trucks, cracked open like old bones, and littered with lizards that darted away before I got close. I kept checking the sun, orienting myself to make sure I wasn't drifting too far west. It was easy to lose direction out there when the land all looked the same in every direction. I was about 3 hours in when I noticed it. A low hum in the air, like distant machinery, faint but steady. At first I thought it was in my head, the way you hear a ringing after a loud concert. But it didn't fade. It was real. The sound was coming from further ahead, past a slight rise in the trail. I stopped walking and held my breath. The hum was coming in steady waves, like the faint throb of a generator. I moved forward slowly, adjusting my pack and loosening the knife on my belt just a little. It wasn't for fighting, more like peace of mind. Something about the sound made me nervous. As I climbed over the rise, the sound got louder. Still distant, but no longer ignorable. I looked down across a shallow gully and saw something that didn't belong. A large metal structure, rectangular and sunken into the side of a hill. It looked like a shipping container half buried in the earth, painted in faded olive green. A short dirt ramp led up to its rusted steel doors. Cables ran out of the back and disappeared into the hill behind it. On top of the container was a small vent fan that spun lazily in the wind, and I realized that was the source of the hum. I froze. The land around me was supposed to be part of protected wilderness. No buildings, no installations, no structures. This thing wasn't marked on any of the maps I had. It wasn't even on the satellite view I had saved. It looked old, but not abandoned. The fan was spinning, and there was a faint smell in the air, oil maybe. Metal, something mechanical. I moved closer, but stayed on the higher ground, ducking behind a boulder and peeking over the top. I waited. Nothing moved. No sounds except the steady hum. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was an old survey station or a forgotten utility structure. But deep down I didn't believe that. I should have turned back right then. Instead, I dropped my pack behind the boulder, kept only my water bottle and the knife, and slowly made my way down the slope. My boots crunched on loose gravel, and I winced at how loud it seemed. The closer I got, the more I realized how out of place the container looked. There were no signs, no numbers, no indication of ownership, just plain green metal, streaked with rust. When I reached the base of the ramp, I noticed something else. Tracks. Not animal tracks, tire marks. Faint but recent. Someone had driven a vehicle up here. Not large, maybe an ATV or small utility truck. There were also boot prints in the dust, some old, some less so. My chest tightened. I walked up the ramp and stood at the doors. They were padlocked with a thick chain, but one of the locks was broken, snapped clean in half. The metal around it had been bent outward as if forced. I bent down and touched it. Fresh break. The rust was clean around the snap. The hum was louder now, and I realized it was deeper than I thought, more of a vibration, like something inside was running. I don't know what made me do it, but I gripped the door handle and pulled. It opened an inch before catching against the bent lock. I could see a sliver of darkness inside. Cool air drifted out, carrying the scent of oil and something else I couldn't place, something almost sweet, but wrong. I let go and stepped back. The hairs on my arms were standing up. Every part of me screamed that I wasn't supposed to be here. I turned to leave. That's when I heard it. Not the hum, not the wind, something from inside. A thud, dull, then another, then the sound of metal dragging across metal. I froze. My feet wouldn't move. The dragging stopped. Then silence. I don't remember running, not exactly. Just flashes of sky and rock, and the feeling of air burning in my throat. I didn't stop until I was back at my pack. I threw it over my shoulders and didn't even bother with the straps. I just started walking fast, almost jogging, using the sun to keep my bearings and heading straight back toward the main trail. But the land didn't look the same anymore. I passed the same boulder 3 times. I started marking branches with small strips of orange tape from my pack, a habit I'd used before, and even then, I passed one of them again 20 minutes later. I knew then that I wasn't just lost. I was turned around. I stopped moving and sat down to calm myself. I checked my GPS. The screen was blank, just a flashing error symbol where the map should be. I pulled out the compass and map. The compass spun uselessly, not settling. I tapped it, shook it, still spinning. I tried my phone. No service, no location, nothing. I took a deep breath and tried to think. The sun was beginning to drop. If I didn't figure it out soon, I'd be stuck out here in the dark. I didn't want to camp near that place. Whatever that container was, I didn't want to be within miles of it. I picked the clearest direction and started walking. I followed a dry creek bed, hoping it would lead me downhill toward more familiar terrain. Then, just before sunset, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A fresh set of boot prints in the dust ahead of me. Not mine, not old, heading in the same direction I was. Someone else was out here, and I hadn't heard a sound. I veered off the creek bed and climbed a small ridge to get a better view. As I reached the top, I ducked low and scanned the land. At first I saw nothing, then movement. Far below, a figure walking slowly across the open ground, dressed in dark clothes, head covered by a hood or hat. They were carrying something, a long object slung over their shoulder. I didn't know if it was a shovel, a pipe, or something else. I didn't wait to find out. I backed down the ridge and made my way in the opposite direction, sticking to the low ground and moving as fast as I could without making noise. That night, I didn't set up a tent. I found a spot under an overhang and curled into my sleeping bag, keeping my pack close and my knife in my hand. I didn't sleep. Every time the wind shifted, I imagined footsteps. Every shadow looked like someone crouched and waiting. I chewed a protein bar with dry, cracking teeth and sipped water sparingly. At some point, maybe around 3 a.m., I heard it again. The hum, fainter now, but still there, carried on the wind. I wasn't far enough. When the sun rose, I started walking again. My legs ached, and my skin felt cracked and raw. I had no idea if I was even heading toward the trail anymore, but I had to keep moving. Around noon, I saw it, the main path. A flash of orange on a trail marker. I nearly cried. I hiked for hours, not stopping, not turning back. I finally reached the parking lot by early evening. My car was still there, untouched, dusty, familiar. I drove until I had cell service. My phone lit up with missed notifications. I called my brother, told him I was fine, told him the hike had been longer than planned. That was it. I didn't tell him about the container. I didn't tell anyone. But a week later, I checked the satellite map again. That section I wasn't planning to be out there that long. That day was supposed to be simple. Just a quiet drive into the woods to check out an old fire lookout tower I'd read about online. I had the day off, and I'd been feeling kind of anxious and tired of screens, so being alone out there in nature sounded good, peaceful. I packed water, a sandwich, a first aid kit, and a flashlight just in case. Nothing heavy. It was only supposed to be a short hike. 2 hours up, maybe an hour or so walking around, and then back to the car before sunset. The drive was easy at first. Smooth paved roads winding through small towns with hand-painted signs and gas stations that still had analog pumps. As I got closer to the trailhead, the pavement gave way to gravel, and then dirt. My little sedan didn't love that part, but I went slow, tires kicking up dust. Trees thickened on both sides until I couldn't see more than a few feet into the woods. No service on my phone for the last half hour, but I'd already downloaded the offline map and saved the route, so I wasn't worried. The trail wasn't marked by any big sign, just a faded wooden post leaning to one side with a small carved arrow. I parked in a little pullout where the ground was mostly level and locked the car. It was quiet, no birdsong, no wind. Just me, the trees, and the faint crunch of dried pine needles under my boots. The trail was narrow but easy to follow. A thin path of trampled soil winding upward, flanked by trees that grew so close together their branches touched. After about 20 minutes, I started to sweat. It wasn't hot, just humid and still. I kept walking, trying not to psych myself out. I told myself the air always felt like that under heavy trees. Still, I couldn't shake the strange silence around me. I've hiked a lot of trails, and even in remote places there's always something, a squirrel, a bird, wind pushing leaves. Here, there was none of that. I pressed on, wiping sweat off my neck. The only sound I heard was my own breathing and the occasional crackle of something underfoot. I checked the map a few times. It said the tower was just over 3 miles in. I'd covered at least half of that already. I told myself the silence was fine. Maybe the area had burned a few years ago. Maybe the animals hadn't come back yet. But it didn't feel right. About halfway in, the path curved around a steep slope, hugging the edge of a hillside. To the left, the forest stretched downhill. To the right, it rose in a jagged wall of tangled roots and boulders. I stopped to catch my breath and looked down the slope, trying to guess how far I'd climbed. It was steep, maybe 100 feet down to the bottom, where thick underbrush choked the floor of the forest. I looked up the trail again, squinting ahead. Still no tower. I kept walking, slower now. My legs were starting to feel it. That's when I saw something odd on the trail, 2 deep impressions in the dirt. I thought they were footprints at first, but they were too far apart and too deep. I crouched and looked closer. Whatever made them had heavy legs and walked in a straight line, not human-shaped, but not hooves either. No tread, no pattern. Just long oval marks, almost like someone had pressed the ends of small barrels into the dirt. I stared at them for a long minute, then looked around. Nothing. No sounds. Just me and those marks. I stood up and moved on, heart beating a little faster now. I told myself it was probably a fallen branch or a deer. The trail got steeper after that, winding between thick trees that arched over the path. I came around a bend and finally saw the fire tower in the distance. It stood on a rocky outcrop, tall and rusted, its metal frame barely visible through the gaps in the trees. I felt a weird mix of relief and unease. I wasn't sure why. When I got closer, I could see that the stairs had partially collapsed. The lower half was gone entirely, leaving the first platform hanging about 12 feet off the ground. I walked around it, trying to find another way up, but the metal was badly rusted and sharp in places. There was no ladder, no rope, nothing I could use to climb safely. I settled for walking around the base, scanning the forest through the broken slats of the wooden floor above. I stood there for a long time, drinking water and eating the sandwich I'd packed. I sat on a rock and looked out across the trees, trying to enjoy the peace, but something still felt wrong. The silence pressed in harder now, like the forest was holding its breath. I kept checking the trees around me, eyes darting toward every slight movement. A branch shifting, a shadow between trunks. Each time, nothing was there. Eventually, I stood up and decided to head back. I didn't want to be in those woods after dark, especially with no cell service. I looked at the sky, still bright, but the sun was dropping lower than I liked. I packed up my stuff, brushed the crumbs off my lap, and started back down the trail. The air felt heavier now. The silence seemed thicker somehow. I walked fast, maybe too fast. My foot caught on a root, and I stumbled hard, catching myself on a tree. My heart was pounding. I told myself to calm down. Just a hike. Just woods. Nothing to be afraid of. About 20 minutes into the walk back, I stopped. The trail didn't look right. The bend was too sharp, the slope was wrong. I pulled out the map. My location dot floated off the trail, just a little, but still off. I tried to backtrack. The path looked almost identical in both directions. I turned left, then second-guessed myself, and turned back the other way. After 10 more minutes of walking, I realized I was completely turned around. I stopped and tried to breathe slow. I downloaded the map. I had sunlight. I wasn't far from the car. I just needed to find the original trail. I scanned the ground for my footprints, but saw none. The dry dirt and pine needles didn't hold prints well. I walked in a circle, looking for landmarks, anything that looked familiar. Nothing did. That's when I heard something. A rustling. Not wind, not an animal scurrying, but something slow and steady. I froze. It came from behind me, deeper in the trees. I turned but saw nothing. I waited, ears straining. It stopped. I started walking again, this time slower, trying not to make too much noise. Every step sounded too loud. A few minutes later, I heard it again, this time closer. A long, dragging sound, like something being pulled over dry leaves and twigs. I turned again. Still nothing. I crouched behind a thick tree trunk and waited. My breathing sounded loud. The rustling came again, then stopped. Then again, from the other side now. It was circling me. I stood up and ran. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just wanted to get to an open space, somewhere I could see the sky. I ran downhill, dodging between trees, branches slapping my arms and face. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard. I slid a few feet on my side, hands scraping against rocks and sticks. I rolled over and listened. Nothing. I stood up, breathing hard, and looked around. The forest looked the same in every direction. I pulled out the flashlight, even though it was still light out. The shadows under the trees were growing darker. I turned in a slow circle, then picked a direction and walked fast, not running this time, but close. After maybe 20 minutes of walking, I found something. A small clearing with an old, collapsed wooden structure in the middle. It looked like the remains of a cabin or shed, just a few rotted beams and the frame of a door leaning at an angle. I stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked around. There were no paths leading away from it, just trees thick and silent. I stepped into the clearing and walked slowly toward the structure. I wasn't sure why. Something about it drew me. I looked down and saw more of those strange marks in the dirt, those long, deep oval impressions. They led up to the collapsed doorway, then vanished into the dark inside. I felt eyes on me. I turned sharply and scanned the tree line. Nothing. No movement. But the feeling stayed. Watching. Waiting. I stepped back, heart hammering. I turned and walked quickly out of the clearing, not running, just moving fast. I didn't want to draw attention. I didn't know why. I just knew I needed to leave. The forest grew darker as the sun dipped low. I checked the map again. Still no signal, but I could see I was way off the trail now. I started heading northwest, toward where the car should be, hoping I could cut through and find the road. The trees got denser. The underbrush tore at my legs. My arms were scratched raw. Then I heard it again. The dragging sound. Closer now. To my left. I stopped breathing. The sound moved again, slow, deliberate. I didn't turn. I just walked faster. I didn't look back. It followed. It stayed just out of sight, moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped. Always just behind. After what felt like forever, the trees began to thin. I saw light through the gaps, pale golden. I pushed through a final line of scrub and found myself back on the dirt road. My car sat just down the slope, the sun glinting off the windshield. I ran, full speed. I didn't look back until I reached the car. When I turned around, the forest was still. Silent. Empty. I unlocked the door, jumped in, and locked it behind me. I sat there, gripping the wheel, breathing hard. My shirt was soaked. My hands were shaking. I turned the key. The engine started on the first try. I backed out fast, tires sliding in the dirt, and sped down that road without stopping. When I got home, I told myself I'd been scared for no reason, that it was just getting lost, just being alone in unfamiliar woods. I told myself the dragging sound was my imagination. I told myself I'd imagine the marks. But I know what I heard, and I know something followed.